The chains encircling Dr. Ardan Cole's wrists were absurdly heavy. He mused, especially since he had no intention of battling his way through a starship teeming with 3-meter-tall Zyran warriors. Physical combat wasn't his style. Psychological warfare, on the other hand, was far more exhilarating. You know, Ardan quipped to his escort, a surly Zyran soldier, whose blood-red scales gleaming like a warning. These restraints are a serious fashion faux pas. I wore my finest tactical suit for this so-called negotiation, and now the whole vibe's ruined. The soldier's brow furrowed, a telltale Zyran sign of irritation Ardan had come to recognize. Silence, human, the warrior growled, his voice a low rumble. Oh, come on, Ardan pressed undeterred as they neared a pair of colossal doors that screamed either throne room or execution chamber, possibly both. You toss human around like it's a slur. Ever wonder if that's why this war's dragged on for 9 years? Maybe work on your communication skills. The soldier's grip tightened on his plasma rifle, but before he could raid her, the door swung open with a thunderous boom that Ardan had to admit was gloriously dramatic. The chamber beyond was a spectacle of Zyran grandeur, vast Gothic, bathed in a menacing crimson glow that practically shouted, "We're the villains, and we revel in it." At the far end, perched on a throne carved from a single obsidian monolith, sat Queen Solera of the Zyran Empire. Ardan had seen her in holograms every human in the Terran Coalition had. She was the nightmare parents invoked to scare children into obedience, the terror that haunted admirals' sleepless nights, the destroyer who'd reduced 3 human colonies to cosmic ash. But no hologram could capture her presence. She was magnificent, a living cataclysm, 3 meters of midnight, blue muscle, her skin absorbing light like a void. Her 4 arms were posed with effortless dominance, 2 resting on the throne's arms, 2 crossed over her chest. Her armor wasn't mere protection, but an extension of her lethal grace, all sharp edges promising violence. Yet it was her eyes, 6 of them arranged in twin rows each, a distinct shade of violet, that seized Ardan's breath, their piercing intensity making his skin tingle. Dr. Ardan Cole Solera intoned her voice, a velvet-wrapped thunderstorm architect of the Copper Station defense mastermind, of the Proxen stratagem, the human who's cost me more ships and soldiers than any general in your feeble coalition. Ardan squared his shoulders as best he could beneath the chains. You left out devastatingly charming and unrivaled at karaoke, but I'll let it slide, Your Majesty. His tone carried just enough sarcasm to sting without crossing into outright defiance. One of Solera's eyebrows arched an impressively expressive gesture for someone with 6 eyes. You came to Karsara under the guise of negotiation, she said, rising from her throne with a fluid elegance that defied her towering frame. You knew it was a trap, obviously, Ardan replied, the chains clinking as he shrugged. Your idea of subtlety is about as refined as a supernova, a fake distress signal from a human ship, an unguarded approach vector. Honestly, I'm a little offended you thought I'd fall for it. And yet here you are. Solera descended the throne steps, each footfall echoing like a war drum through the cavernous chamber. You walked into certain death because... I was curious, Ardan said simply, his gaze matching her intensity. Death's not certain, that's a logical fallacy rooted in incomplete data. You could have vaporized my ship before I landed, or gutted me the moment I stepped off. You didn't. That tells me you want something from me, Your Majesty, and that makes me very curious indeed. Solera paused just beyond his reach, though with her arm span reach was a relative term. Up close, Ardan could trace the intricate scarification patterns etched across her skin, each mark a testament to a conquered world. There were far too many. You humans fascinate me, she said at last, her voice low and deliberate. Weak, fragile, barely out of your planetary cradle with no claws, no natural armor. You should have been crushed in months, not years. And yet here we are, Ardan finished, a spark of defiance in his tone. 9 years later, and you're no closer to Earth than you were on day 1. Frustrating, isn't it? Solera's lips curved into something that might have been a smile, if smile bared that many razor-sharp teeth. Do you know why you're still alive? Dr. Cole Entertainment. He ventured, his stomach tightening but his face betraying nothing. Tomorrow is the Feast of Ascendancy, she said, a celebration of Zyran dominance, where our mightiest warriors prove their supremacy in the arena. The crowd craves blood, human blood specifically. Why waste a renowned human like you on a mere execution when you can serve a grander purpose? Ardan's heart pounded, but he kept his expression steady. Let me guess. I fight one of your warriors, die spectacularly, the crowd roars, and you prove humans are weak. Classic spectacle. No, Solera said, her smile widening, sharp and predatory. You won't face one of my warriors, Dr. Cole. You'll face me. The chamber fell deathly silent, save for the faint hum of energy fields and the sudden thunder of Ardan's pulse. Zyran nobles and soldiers shifted uncomfortably, clearly unprepared for this twist. That feels like overkill, Ardan said, his voice steady despite the chaos in his chest. Literally, perhaps Solera replied, her tone laced with menace. But you've become a legend among my people, Dr. Cole, the human who outwits battles, who turns frailty into strength. Some of my younger warriors admire you. The word dripped with disdain, like a bitter taste she couldn't spit out. That admiration must be crushed. When I destroy you tomorrow before the entire empire, it won't just be your body that shatters. It will be the myth that human cunning can defy Zyran might. Wow, Ardan said, unable to resist. That's practically poetry. Did you rehearse that or was it improvised? Because I'm genuinely impressed. Solera's 6 eyes narrowed, their violet hues glinting with irritation. You mask your fear with humor, another human weakness. It's called a coping mechanism, Ardan shot back, stepping forward, a bold move that startled even him. Most psychologists say it's pretty healthy, but since we're being candid, let me tell you what I think's really going on. You're not staging this arena fight to prove a point to your people. You're doing it to prove something to yourself. The air in the chamber grew colder, heavier. Solera's second pair of arms unfolded, revealing claws longer than Ardan's fingers, gleaming with lethal promise. Careful, Doctor, she said, her voice a soft, chilling whisper, more terrifying than any shout. You're alive because I permit it. That can change. But it won't, Ardan said, meeting each of her 6 eyes in turn, his voice steady despite the odds. You need me at my best tomorrow. You need me to fight, to scheme, to throw every trick I've got at you. A hollow victory over a broken prisoner means nothing. You want to defeat Dr. Ardan Cole, the legend, and you can't do that if you kill me tonight in a fit of pique. For a long electric moment, they locked gazes, Ardan barely reaching her chest, wrists bound, surrounded by hostile aliens light years from any human aid, and Solera, the warrior queen who'd never lost a duel in her 2 centuries of life. You're right, she said, at last, her voice measured but laced with grudging respect. I want you at your peak. That's why you'll have quarters befitting your status, food, water, even limited access to our combat archives. Study them, watch every opponent I've faced, count the seconds they lasted. The longest was 43, a Chromac warrior priest with 4 hearts and redundant nerves. I carved them out one by one to test his resilience. It didn't help. Charming, Ardan muttered, his sarcasm a thin shield against the chill her words sent down his spine. Rest well, Dr. Cole. You'll need it. She turned, striding back to her throne with regal finality, dismissing him. The guards moved to drag him away, but Ardan resisted just long enough to call out, Your Majesty, one question. She paused, not turning. Speak. The scarification patterns, he said, his analytical mind overriding his survival instincts. 1 mark per conquered world, right? Correct, she said, her voice tight. Which one's for your homeworld? The silence that followed was deafening, a void that swallowed every breath in the room. Even the energy field seemed to hush. Slowly, deliberately, Solera turned, her 6 eyes blazing. What did you say? Ardan pressed on, reckless but calculated. It's curious, that's all. The marks follow a chronological pattern, conquest by conquest, but one stands out. Older, different technique hidden among the others, but clearly predating them. A civil war, maybe. A rebellion you crushed before turning your gaze outward. Get him out, Solera ordered, her voice a deadly whisper. The guards seized him, dragging him from the chamber, but not before Ardan caught a flicker across her face. Not the rage he'd braced for, but something raw, almost like pain. His new quarters were as promised, a step above a bare cell, a clean space with an actual bed, sealed by an invisible force field that shimmered only when inspected closely. A terminal offered access to the Zyran Empire's combat archives, a trove of brutal history. Ardan sat on the bed, rubbing his freed wrists, still stinging from the chains. His escort had shoved him inside with excessive force, muttering what his translator pegged as Zyran curses, basic ones, It could parse, though the creative ones left it stumped. Ardon Cole should have been quaking in his boots. Tomorrow he'd face a being who could rend him in two with her four bare hands, literally. No weapons, no armor, no allies, just him against a warrior queen with a kill count spanning centuries. Yet his mind wasn't on the looming slaughter. It lingered on that fleeting glimpse of vulnerability on Solera's face when he'd mentioned her homeworld. A calculated stab in the dark built on psychological profiling and pattern analysis, but it had struck deeper than he'd dared hope. He activated the terminal, its screen flaring to life with Xiren combat records. The footage was as savage as promised. Solera didn't just defeat her foes, she obliterated them, each strike a symphony of precision and power. But Ardon wasn't studying the carnage. He watched her, the subtle shifts in her stance, the split-second hesitations, the choices she made when no one else noticed. "Computer," he said, testing the system's voice recognition. It hummed in response. "Show me records from before Solera became queen." "Access restricted," the terminal replied in a flat mechanical Xiren dialect. "Fine. Show me general history of Karsara from 200 years ago. Access permitted." The screen flooded with data and Ardon dove in. The records were polished propaganda, carefully curated to glorify the current regime, but no censorship could erase every truth. Between the sanitized lines, a story bled through. Karsara hadn't always been the Xiren Empire's throne world. 2 centuries ago, it was a backwater border planet sneered at by the core worlds. Then came the so-called unification, a euphemism for a brutal civil war. A young warrior named Solera had risen from obscurity, claiming ancient rights and toppling the old order with unrelenting force. "Show me images from the unification period." Ardon commanded. The terminal complied, displaying grainy footage of ceremonies, battles, and triumphant parades. In one frame, barely visible in the backdrop of a coronation scene, stood a younger Solera. She was different, not just youthful, but unburdened, her 6 violet eyes free of the cold certainty that defined her now. Beside her, almost cropped out, was another Xiren, smaller, with distinct markings that hinted at something. "Image restricted," the terminal declared abruptly, and the picture vanished. "Interesting," Ardon murmured, his curiosity now. A roaring fire. For hours, he sifted through combat techniques, Xiren psychology, and cultural rituals, anything that might give him an edge in the arena. But his thoughts kept circling back to that restricted image and the raw pain in Solera's eyes. A theory was taking shape, wild, likely wrong, undeniably dangerous, but better than facing death empty-handed. A chime at the door broke his focus. A Xiren servant entered, not a warrior but a civilian, smaller with duller scales and only 2 arms. They placed a tray of food on the table, avoiding Ardon's gaze, and turned to leave. "Wait," he said in halting Xiren, his translator implant straining to keep up. The servant froze. "What's your name?" "Servants have no names," they replied, voice robotic. "Everyone's got a name," Ardon pressed gently. "What do your friends call you when the nobles aren't listening?" The servant's eyes flicked to the door, then back to him. "Cherry," they whispered, barely audible. "Cherry," Ardon echoed, offering a small smile. "Can I ask you something off the record? I should go," Cherry stammered, scales flickering with unease. "The unification," Ardon said quickly. "Were you alive then?" Cherry's scales shifted to a distressed gray. "No, my parent was." "What did they tell you about it?" "Nothing. Speaking of the old times is forbidden. But people talk anyway, don't they?" "When they think no one's listening." Cherry hesitated, then spoke so softly Ardon strained to hear. "They say the queen had a sister. They say she was weak, believed in peace with the outer worlds. They say the queen did what was necessary to make the Xiren strong." "What happened to her?" Ardon asked, leaning forward. "No one knows. She vanished during the unification. Some say the queen killed her. Others say she fled. Her name was erased from all records." "Speaking it as death. What was her name?" Cherry shook their head and hurried to leave, but not before slipping a tiny data chip into Ardon's hand, no larger than his fingernail. He waited until the room was silent, then inserted the chip into the terminal. It held a single file, corrupted, fragmented, but partially recoverable. An ancient, grainy image flickered to life, 2 young Xiren females, clearly sisters, adorned with matching ceremonial markings. One was unmistakably Solera. The other, her eyes held the same fierce intelligence, but softened by something, compassion perhaps, or hope. At the bottom, barely legible, was a caption Solera and Lacera on the eve of their choosing. Lacera Ardan whispered the name, heavy with meaning. The sister who dreamed of peace, the weakness Solera had to erase to forge her empire. He crushed the chip in his hand, its fragments scattering like ash. Knowledge like this was a death sentence in his position, but it had given him something priceless: understanding. Solera wasn't born the destroyer of worlds. She'd been forged by loss, by a choice that forced her to kill or banish her own sister to seize power. Every conquest since was less about empire and more about proving that sacrifice wasn't in vain, that strength was all that mattered, that she hadn't shattered her family for nothing. Ardan lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling's alien patterns. Tomorrow he'd face Queen Solera in the arena. She expected him to wield human cunning, to dance with tricks and ingenuity. She expected to crush him, proving might was right. But Ardan had a new plan: not to fight Solera the warrior queen, but to challenge Solera the sister, the one still haunted by an impossible choice. It was a plan that would likely get him killed, but he'd walked into this trap knowing death was probable. At least now his death might carry meaning. The cell's lights dimmed, signaling the sleep cycle. Ardan closed his eyes, his mind racing through psychological profiles and strategies. He had one shot to unravel Solera's iron certainty, to make her question the empire she'd built on blood and guilt. The irony: he wasn't fighting to win the war anymore. Somewhere between capture and now his mission had shifted. He didn't want to defeat Queen Solera. He wanted to save her from herself. Morning came too fast and not fast enough. Ardan had slept fitfully, haunted by nightmares of being torn apart in spectacularly creative ways. But when the guards arrived, he was ready, physically battered, but mentally razor-sharp. They dressed him in traditional combat attire, a sleek black bodysuit designed to highlight every drop of blood for dramatic effect. No armor, no weapons, just his wits and a reckless plan. The march to the arena was deliberately long, the distant roar of thousands of Zyran voices growing louder with every step. They craved blood, his blood specifically. "Lovely day for a public execution," Ardan quipped to his escorts. They didn't respond, though one's scales twitched in what might have been a smirk or a grimace. Zyran expressions were maddeningly hard to read. The arena's entrance was a towering archway opening onto sand the color of dried blood. Whether natural or stained by centuries of slaughter, Ardan didn't care to guess. The arena itself was colossal, a stadium of tiered seats packed with Zyran spectators. Their roar as he appeared was deafening, not a cheer, but the hungry anticipation of a crowd awaiting the opening act before the main course. Across the arena, another archway parted, and Queen Solera emerged. No armor, just ceremonial wraps that bared her scarred skin, each mark glowing under the harsh lights. She carried no weapons, her body was weapon enough. The crowd's roar swelled to a fever pitch, but Solera raised a single hand, and silence crashed down like a guillotine. "Citizens of the Zyran Empire," her voice boomed, amplified by unseen speakers, resonating with unshakable authority. "Today you witness the truth of our supremacy. This human doctor, Ardan Cole, is the best his species can muster, their sharpest mind, their most celebrated strategist. Watch as I prove that even humanity's finest is nothing before Zyran's strength." The crowd erupted in approval. Ardan spotted dignitaries in elevated boxes, military officers and recording devices. This was being broadcast across the Empire, maybe even into Terran space. "Dr. Cole," Solera said, turning her 6 violet eyes on him. "You may speak. Last words are a tradition even we honor." Ardan stepped to the arena's center, his voice carrying without need for amplification, steady despite the weight of 1,000 gazes. "I have one question for you, Your Majesty." Solera tilted her head, a flicker of curiosity in her eyes. "Yes, do you ever wonder if she'd be proud of what you've become?" The silence that followed was absolute, as if the universe itself held its breath. "I don't know who you mean," Solera said, but a tremor in her voice betrayed her. "I think you do," Ardan said, taking a daring step forward. "I think her face haunts you every time you catch your reflection. Every new scar, every conquered world, you hear her voice, don't you? Asking if this is strength or just fear dressed in armor." "Enough," Solera's voice cut like a blade, sharp and dangerous. "You know nothing. I know true strength isn't about how many worlds you can burn to ash." Ardan pressed his voice steady but fervent. It's about having the power to destroy and choosing to build instead. It's about creation, not carnage. In a blur, Solera was upon him, her hand closing around his throat, lifting him effortlessly from the sand. You dare speak of things you can't comprehend, she hissed, her face inches from his, her six eyes blazing. You dare invoke ghosts you know nothing of. I know, Ardon gasped, fighting for air, that she loved you. And you loved her. Killing her didn't make you strong, it left you alone. Solera hurled him to the ground. Ardon hit the sand hard, rolling to cushion the impact, his ribs screaming, but unbroken for now. Get up, she commanded. Fight! Ardon rose slowly, spitting out sand, his body aching, but his resolve unshaken. No, what I'm not fighting you, Solera, he said, voice calm but unyielding. I'm going to stand here, talk to you, and let you kill me for it. But before you do, there's something you need to know. Silence, Solera whispered, her voice raw, trembling with an emotion Ardon couldn't quite name. She would forgive you. Solera charged, a blur of midnight blue fury. Ardon stood rooted, unflinching, as her claws arced toward his throat, only to halt quivering millimeters from his flesh. Why won't you fight? She demanded, her six violet eyes blazing with frustration and something deeper, something broken. Because that's what you expect, Ardon said, his voice steady, despite the pain radiating from his bruised ribs. It's what they all expect. The human fights, loses, and proves might makes right. But what if I don't? What if I stand here unarmed, refusing to strike back? What does that say about strength? The arena's crowd stirred their murmurs, a restless tide. This wasn't the blood-soaked spectacle they'd come for. You think your pacifism makes you noble? Solera snarled, her voice a jagged edge of rage. It makes you weak, does it? Ardon countered, meeting her gaze. Then why haven't you killed me yet? Her hand lashed out a backhanded blow that sent him hurtling across the sand. Pain exploded in his chest, a cracked rib, maybe two. Ardon struggled to his feet, wiping blood from his lips, his vision swimming, but his resolve unshaken. I've studied you, he said, voice rough but clear. Every battle, every conquest. You always offer surrender, even when you know they'll refuse. Why to mock their defiance? No. Because she would have wanted you to. Because deep down, you're still the woman who believed there was another way. Solera seized him by the shoulders, her grip a vice that made his bones groan. Stop talking about her, she hissed, shaking him with desperate force. Lysera, Ardon said softly, the name a quiet blade. Her name was Lysera. Solera froze, her claws tightening painfully, her six eyes wild with a fear Ardon hadn't anticipated. How she whispered, voice barely audible. Does it matter she existed? She was real. And you carry her with you, don't you? That first scar hidden among the others, it's not for a conquered world. It's for her. Solera's eyes churned with emotion, fear, guilt, a storm of pain she'd buried for centuries. You don't understand, she said, her voice cracking. The empire was crumbling. Raiders, slavers, chaos tearing us apart. Someone had to be strong to unite us. Even if it meant, her words faltered, even if it meant killing the one I loved most. She wouldn't fight. She believed in words and peace with the outer worlds. But the galaxy doesn't bow to words, it bows to strength. And you've spent every conquest since proving you were right, Ardon said, his voice gentle but relentless. Every world you shatter, every enemy you crush. It's all to convince yourself that her death wasn't for nothing. Solera released him, stumbling back as if struck. The arena fell silent, thousands of Zyran eyes watching their queen unravel her iron facade, cracking under the weight of the human's words. Fight me, she said, her voice no longer commanding, but pleading. Please fight me. No, Ardon said, unwavering. You'll kill me, I know. But I'll die proving there's another way. That strength isn't just violence. That humans, fragile as we are, have something you've forgotten. And what's that? Solera asked, trembling, caught between rage and something softer. Ardon smiled, blood streaking his chin. The ability to forgive. Our enemies ourselves. The crowd's restlessness grew, their confusion palpable. Then a voice cut through the tension from the royal box. Finish him, your majesty, or I will. Ardon looked up to see General Kalarath, a towering Zyran, clad in military finery, standing at the railing. His forearms brandished an arsenal, a plasma blade, a neural whip, a projectile cannon, and something disturbingly like a molecular disintegrator. His eyes held none of Solera's depth, only cold, naked ambition. General Calarath Solera said, her gaze still locked on Ardon. This is my fight. Then fight, Calarath spat, or prove the human has made you weak. There it was, the political undercurrent Ardon had sensed. Calarath coveted the throne, and Solera's hesitation was his opening. You know, Ardon said, his tone deceptively casual, he's going to kill you eventually. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but soon. He doesn't believe in your strength anymore. He smells weakness. Silence, human, Calarath bellowed from above. It's funny, Ardon continued, ignoring him. You've spent centuries proving you can lead through fear, but you've forgotten how to lead through respect. And now the moment you show a shred of compassion, or whatever the Zyren call it, they turn on you like predators sensing blood. Solera's eyes flicked between Ardon and Calarath, and Ardon saw realization dawn. This wasn't about him. Calarath had engineered this entire spectacle, knowing Dr. Ardon Cole would get under her skin, knowing she'd falter. Your Majesty, Calarath said, his tone twisting the title into mockery the Empire watches. Show them strength or step aside for someone who can. Solera turned back to Ardon, her 6 eyes hardening with a decision. She raised a clawed hand poised for a killing strike. Do it, Ardon said softly, unflinching. But know that when you kill me, you're not just killing a human. You're killing the last soul in the galaxy who believes you can be more than the monster you've made yourself. Her hand trembled, the crowd holding its collective breath. Then in a move that stunned everyone, Ardon, most of all Queen Solera of the Zyren Empire, dropped to one knee in the blood-red sand. The arena exploded into chaos. For 3 seconds, silence reigned. Then Calarath vaulted over the royal box's railing, landing with a force that cratered the sand. His 4 arms splayed wide, each wielding a deadly weapon. Plasma blade, neural whip projectile cannon, and the ominous molecular disintegrator. You kneel before a human. His voice thundered across the arena, thick with disgust. The great Queen Solera, destroyer of worlds, conqueror of systems grovels. Before this frail, pathetic creature, Solera remained kneeling, her 6 eyes fixed on Ardon, unmoved by Calarath's theatrics. The crowd was a maelstrom, some baying for blood, others shouting in confusion, and a growing number falling silent, sensing history unfolding. Ardon's head spun his cracked ribs, impossible internal bleeding, warring with the surreal sight of the galaxy's most feared warrior kneeling before him. But his mind, relentless, ever-churning, raced on. You know, Ardon said, his voice cutting through the arena's strange acoustics, for someone who claims to embody strength, you sure picked a convenient moment to strike. Almost like you were waiting for her to show a crack in her armor. That's not strength, General. That's opportunism. Calarath's brow narrowed, his scales flushing with anger. The human dares speak to me. Daring's kind of our thing. Ardon shot back, taking a painful step forward to place himself between Calarath and the still kneeling Solera. It was a futile gesture. Calarath could shred him like paper, but symbols mattered. Let's cut to the chase. You planned this, didn't you? This whole setup, you knew bringing me here would rattle her. You knew about Lysera. The name sent a shockwave through the crowd. Younger Zyren looked baffled, but older ones recoiled, fear flickering in their eyes. That name is forbidden, Calarath growled, raising his plasma blade. Speaking it is death. Everything's death with you people, Ardon said, unfazed. Death for speaking wrong, death for thinking wrong, death for remembering wrong. Must be exhausting living in a world where murder's the answer to everything. Your Majesty, Calarath addressed Solera, his weapons still trained on Ardon. Rise and end this farce, or I invoke the right of challenge here and now, the right of challenge, an ancient Zyren tradition Ardon had uncovered in his late-night research. Leadership could be contested through combat, but it hadn't been invoked in decades because Solera was undefeatable. Until now, when her refusal to fight a human could be spun as weakness. You planned this perfectly, Ardon said, clarity flooding him. You suggested the fake negotiation. You ensured I was brought here. You studied my psychological tactics, knew I'd get under her skin, make her hesitate, so you could challenge her legitimately. The human's cleverer than I expected, Calarath admitted, his voice dripping with disdain. But cleverness won't save either of you. Your Majesty, I invoke the right of challenge. Your weakness shames the Zyren throne. Face me or abdicate. Solera rose, sand cascading from her like liquid starlight, her movements graceful as a dancer's, despite the weight of the moment. Her voice when she spoke was quiet but carried to every corner of the arena. You invoke the right of challenge while I'm engaged in ritual combat with another opponent. That breaks our laws. You're not in combat, Kalarath spat. You're debating philosophy with prey. This human refuses to fight, so there is no combat. Actually, Ardon interjected, raising a finger. I'd like to amend my stance on the whole not fighting thing. Every eye turned to him. You want to fight? Solera asked, her voice threaded with something Ardon couldn't pin down. Hope warning, or maybe both. Oh, hell no, Ardon said quickly. I want to not die, which is a very different thing. But if the general here's so keen on a show, I've got a better idea than watching you two tear each other apart. A three-way match. All of us in the arena right now. Kalarath laughed, a grating metallic sound. The human thinks he can pit us against each other. You'd be dead in seconds. Probably, Ardon agreed, shrugging despite the pain. But here's the thing about humans, General, we're stupidly good at surviving longer than anyone expects. And we're even better at being incredibly annoying while we do it. So here's my deal. The three of us fight. Last one standing claims the throne. Yes, I know it's insane, a human on the Zyran throne. Laughable. But if your strength is so absolute, if Zyran supremacy is so undeniable, you've got nothing to fear, right? The crowd buzzed, electrified by the audacity of the proposal. Ardon saw the trap snap shut around Kalarath. Refuse, and he'd look cowardly. Accept, and he'd face complications even he couldn't predict. I accept, Solera said suddenly, her voice cutting through the tension. Ardon and Kalarath turned to her, stunned. Your Majesty, Kalarath began. You invoke the right of challenge, Solera interrupted, her tone unyielding. The human has proposed terms including all combatants present. I accept, unless you're afraid to face a weakened queen and a fragile human. Kalarath's scales flushed a furious red. I fear nothing. I accept. Fantastic, Ardon said weakly, his bravado faltering. Great. Perfect. Definitely not regretting this already. The three formed a tense triangle in the arena, the crowd's anticipation crackling like a storm about to break. This was unprecedented, historic, and likely excruciating for Ardon. Kalarath struck first, as Ardon had anticipated a soldier's instinct to exploit any opening. He lunged for Ardon, aiming to eliminate the weakest link. Ardon dove aside, the plasma blade sizzling through the air, carving a molten scar in the sand. He rolled, sprang up, running, and flattened himself as a projectile cannon roared overhead. Running already, human, Kalarath taunted, his voice dripping with scorn. It's called cardio, Ardon shouted back, dodging the neural whip's crackling lash. Great for heart health. Solera moved then, intercepting Kalarath's next strike with the force of a collapsing star. Their collision was cataclysmic, a thunderclap that sent sand spraying like shrapnel. They grappled, forearms, locked, strength, clashing with strength. Ardon seized the moment to catch his breath, his mind racing. He couldn't win through brute force, that was never an option. But combat was more than muscle. It was psychology, strategy, and knowing your enemy. Kalarath was a soldier, direct, brutal, always aiming for the kill. No theatrics, just efficiency. Solera was a warrior and a ruler, her every move a balance of power and symbolism. Solera fought not just for victory, but for meaning, every move a calculated blend of power and symbolism. Ardon, on the other hand, was a survivor, and survivors played dirty when they had to. Clutching a handful of blood-red sand, he waited for his moment. When Kalarath hurled Solera back and turned his predatory gaze on Ardon, the human acted. He flung the sand straight into two of the general's four eyes, a gritty cloud sparking chaos. That's cheating, Kalarath roared, staggering back, claws scrabbling at his face. That's adaptation. Ardon shot back, darting around the general to put Solera's towering form between them. She glanced at him, a flicker of amusement, or maybe respect glinting in her 6 violet eyes. You fight without honor, she said, her tone almost playful despite the chaos. I fight without superhuman strength, razor-sharp claws, or backup organs. Ardon replied, dodging another swipe. I make do with what I've got. Kalarath recovered swiftly, his secondary eyes compensating for the temporary blindness. He charged, a whirlwind of violence engulfing the arena. Solera met him head on, their clash, a seismic eruption of raw power. Ardon wove through the fray, a fleeting shadow, seizing every chance to disrupt, distract, or just be a colossal nuisance? At one point, Kelarath cornered him, the molecular disintegrator's barrel aimed squarely at his head. Any last words, human? The general snarled. Just a question, Ardon gasped, his chest heaving with pain. Did you really think Solera would thank you for killing me? Like, oh, Kelarath, my hero, thanks for murdering the first person in decades to make me feel anything but the weight of this crown. Real romantic move there. Kelarath hesitated just a fraction of a second, his eyes flicking towards Solera. It was enough. Her tail, how had Ardon missed that deadly whip-like appendage lashed out, sweeping Kelarath's legs from under him? The general crashed to the sand, and Ardon scrambled clear. Heart pounding. You play us against each other, Solera Soror observed, her voice steady despite the relentless combat, her midnight blue form barely winded. I survive, Ardon corrected, catching his breath. And I observe. Like how Kelarath isn't trying to kill you, your majesty. He's trying to make you yield. He needs you alive. Silence fell sharp and heavy. Kelarath snarled, hauling himself to his feet. Why Ardon pressed, retreating from both Zyran warriors. Why does he need you alive? Oh, that's clever. The right of challenge doesn't grant full authority unless the ruler yields or dies before the Council of Worlds. And the Council isn't here. This is being broadcast, but they're not present. Kill you now, and there's a succession crisis. Solera's 6 eyes widened, a rare crack in her composure. But if you yield, Ardon continued, you surrender publicly before all these witnesses. His claim is legitimate. That's why he's pulling his punches, using weapons that incapacitate but don't kill outright. He needs you to break. The human talks too much, Kelarath growled, but Ardon saw the truth hit home, his plan exposed. Been told that before, Ardon said, wiping blood from his mouth, his broken ribs screaming with every breath. Usually right before I win, his mind was clear, the path to victory. Not his, but something greater sharpening into focus. Your Majesty, he said formally, voice ringing across the arena. I yield to you. Both Iren froze, staring at him. What Solera said, her voice a mix of shock and suspicion. I yield. I surrender. You win. I formally acknowledge you as the superior combatant and rightful ruler of the Zyran Empire. Ardon dropped to his knees, pain flaring, but worth it for the impact. Now it's just you two. Kelarath can't claim you're weak for sparing a human. You already won that fight. Kelarath's roar of fury shook the arena. You dare interfere with what Ardon cut and grinning despite the agony. Your perfectly orchestrated coup, your carefully crafted character assassination. Sorry to ruin your day, but humans are really good at wrecking plans. It's our species' superpower. Solera's 6 eyes locked on him, their intensity making his skin prickle. Her expression was unreadable, a storm of emotions swirling beneath her regal mask. You yield to save me, she said quietly. I yield because it's the smart move, Ardon replied, his voice softening. And because despite everything, I believe you're the better choice for the galaxy. You've been a conqueror, yes, worlds burned, billions lost. But you did it because you thought it was necessary, not because you savored it. Kelarath. He enjoys it. He craves power for its own sake. You wield it to prevent chaos. That's the difference. Touching, Kelarath sneered, turning to Solera. But irrelevant. The human surrender means nothing. I still invoke the right of challenge. Face me or be branded a coward for eternity. Solera straightened, the queen reasserting herself, vulnerability replaced by iron resolve. I accept your challenge, Kelarath, she said, her voice ablaze. But not here, not in this arena where you've stacked the deck with your supporters. She gestured to the crowd, and Ardon noticed certain sections reacting differently, Kelarath's allies strategically placed. We fight in the old way, the circle of sovereignty. Gasps rippled through the arena. Even Ardon, with his cursory knowledge of Zyran culture, knew the circle of sovereignty was sacred, a ritual duel pure and unadorned. No weapons, no armor, just 2 warriors until one could no longer stand. You're injured, Kelarath pointed out, nodding at the wounds Solera had taken in their 3-way clash. As are you, she countered, her eyes noting his slight limp and the sand still clouding his vision from Ardon's earlier stunt. Fine, Kelarath said, his voice a low growl. The circle. Now. The arena transforms Zyran technology, reshaping the sand into a perfect 20-meter circle, force fields shimmering into existence to bar interference or escape. Ardon found himself outside the ring, a mercy given he could barely stand. A medical drone buzzed toward him, but he waved it off, his eyes fixed on the scene. He had to see this through. Solera and Calarath entered the circle from opposite sides, stripping to minimal combat wraps that bared their scarred skin. Calarath's marks were a brutal tally of battles won, enemies crushed. Solera's were more intricate, a tapestry of conquest woven with threads of loss and sacrifice. Before we begin, Solera said, her voice carrying across the silent arena. I would speak. The time for words is over, Calarath growled. The time for words is never over. She countered, her gaze flicking to Ardon. That's what the human taught me. Addressing the crowd, she continued, for 2 centuries I've ruled through strength, conquering worlds to forge an empire no one could threaten. I believe power was the only truth. The crowd hung on her words breathless. But strength without purpose is just violence. Power without wisdom is tyranny. Humans, fragile as they are, have fought us for 9 years, not because they're strong, but because they believe in something greater. Choice freedom, the right to shape their own destiny. And perhaps there's strength in that too. Pretty words, Calarath spat, but they won't save you. No, Solera agreed, her voice steady. They won't. The fight was brutal elegance, a dance of hammers and grace. Every strike was precise, every defense flawless, until it wasn't. Purple Zyran blood stained the sand. Ardon's analytical mind cataloged each move, each feint. Calarath was stronger, fresher, less battered from their earlier skirmish. But Solera was wiser, more seasoned, and she carried something Calarath lacked doubt. It sounded like weakness, but it made her adaptable fluid where Calarath was rigid with certainty. The battle stretched on minutes, feeling like hours, both warriors slowing, bleeding, pushing beyond Zyran endurance. Then Calarath faltered, overextending in a strike fueled by blind confidence. Solera flowed around it like water, her counterstrike swift and decisive, not fatal, though she could have made it so. Calarath crumpled unconscious to the sand. The arena erupted, cheers, protests, a cacophony of awe at the unprecedented. Solera stood over Calarath, breathing heavily, then did the unthinkable. She helped him up. You fought with honor, she said to the day's general. You will not be executed. You'll be exiled to the frontier worlds where your strength can guard our borders, not tear us apart. Calarath's supporters bristled, ready to riot, but Solera raised a hand. Any who wish to follow him may go. No reprisals, no punishments. We are Zyran. We are strong enough to weather dissent. Arden's legs gave out, exhaustion and pain overwhelming him. This time when the medical drone approached, he let it work its injections, dulling the agony to a distant ache. Solera approached, her 3-meter frame looming like a storm cloud. For a moment they stood in silence, 2 unlikely allies in a galaxy of strife. You yielded to save me, she said finally, her voice soft but resonant. I yielded because it was tactically sound. Ardon replied, a tired grin tugging at his lips. I survived, helped stop a coup. You're welcome, by the way. She knelt, bringing her 6 eyes level with his. You spoke of Lacera. Ardon's breath caught. I did. How did you know research pattern analysis and a servant who probably shouldn't have helped me? But did, he admitted. Don't punish them, please. I won't, she said, pausing. She would have liked you. You argue like her relentlessly. I'll take that as a compliment. You said she'd forgive me. Solera's voice wavered, raw with centuries of guilt. Ardon met her gaze unflinching. I think she would. The real question is whether you can forgive yourself. Solera stood abruptly, her regal mask slipping back into place. You'll be returned to your people. This war, it must end. Mom. 9 years fighting over territory neither side truly needs. It's time to try your way, words over weapons. Just like that, Ardon asked, struggling to his feet, ignoring the drone's protests. Not just like that, Solera said, her eyes sweeping the chaotic crowd before settling on him. Negotiations, treaties, reparations, it'll be messy, brutal in its own way. But it's time. Why? Ardon pressed, searching her face. Because a human who should have died in seconds survived against 2 Zyran warriors, she said. Because you showed me strength isn't just destruction. Because for the first time in 2 centuries, someone reminded me who I was before I became this. That's a lot to put on a sarcastic human with busted ribs, Ardon quipped. Wincing. You'll manage, Solera said, a faint smile showing too many teeth. You're surprisingly adaptable. As guards escorted him to the medical bay, Ardon turned back. Your Majesty, for what it's worth, I think you made the right choice today and 200 years ago. Sometimes there are no good options, just necessary ones. She nodded slowly, her eyes distant. Perhaps, but necessity doesn't lighten the burden. No, Ardon agreed, but sharing it might. As he was led away, the crowd's chaos echoed behind him. Debates, arguments, the birth pangs of a changing empire. Transformation was never easy, especially for a culture rooted in the certainty of strength. But it was possible. Ardon had proven that today. In the surprisingly plush confines of what passed for a Zerenish prison, Ardon Coley assessed his battered body, 3 cracked ribs, internal bruising, a mild concussion, and a patchwork of lacerations. The medical bay was more comfortable than he'd expected, a stark contrast to the blood-soaked arena he'd just left. When Queen Solera entered, she traded her combat wraps for flowing formal robes, their intricate patterns shimmering under the alien lights. There was a shift in her, staggering less the rigid conqueror, more a thoughtful sovereign, as if the weight of her crown had lightened if only slightly. The Council of Worlds has agreed to peace negotiations, she declared without preamble, her 6 violet eyes fixed on him. You'll represent the Terran coalition. Ardon blinked, wincing as pain flared in his chest. I will. Doesn't my government get a say in that? I've already spoken with Admiral. Oh, Harwin Solera said, her voice steady but tinged with amusement. She agrees you're uniquely qualified, having survived single combat with me, and in her words, possessing an annoying knack for being right. That sounds like Harwin Ardan admitted, a wry smile tugging at his lips despite the ache. What's the catch? You'll remain on Kursara for the negotiations, Solera continued as my advisor. Ardon raised an eyebrow, ignoring the protest from his bruised face. My advisor, the Queen of the Zyran Empire, wants a human whispering in her ear. I want someone who speaks truth even when it stings. Especially when it stings, she said, her tone unyielding yet earnest. My court is filled with sycophants who parrot what they think I want to hear. You told me things I never wanted to hear while I was trying to kill you. Fair point. Ardon conceded, his voice softening. They stood in a charged silence, the weight of their unlikely alliance settling between them. Then Solera did something startling. She smiled. It was small, tentative, and revealed far too many razor-sharp teeth to be truly comforting, but it was real, a glimpse of the woman beneath the conqueror. You know, she said, her voice almost playful, in all my centuries of conquest, no one has ever exasperated me quite like you. I'll take that as a compliment, Ardon replied, his grin widening despite the pain. You mentioned forgiveness in the arena, the ability to forgive, even enemies. Did you mean it? Ardon paused, the question cutting deeper than he expected. I've lost friends in this war, he said, his voice quieter now, heavy with memory. Good people who died defending their homes from your fleets. Part of me wants to hate you for that. But hate is a heavy load and it doesn't bring them back. So yeah, I meant it. Forgiveness isn't about erasing the past or excusing it. It's about choosing to move forward instead of being chained to what's gone. Humans are peculiar creatures, Solera mused, a spark of amusement in her eyes. We are, Ardon agreed, chuckling softly, but we're also damn good at building bridges, even with those who started out trying to kill us. Is that what we're doing? She asked, tilting her head. Building a bridge, I think so, he said, his tone earnest. A weird, wobbly bridge between two species that have spent 9 years trying to wipe each other out. What could possibly go wrong? Solera laughed, a sound like distant thunder rolling across a stormy plain. Everything. Everything could go wrong. Maybe, Ardon said, his eyes meeting hers. But just maybe something could go right. She nodded, turning to leave, then paused at the door. Dr. Cole, she said, her voice softer now. Yes, thank you for seeing more in me than a conqueror. Thank you for being more than a conqueror. After she left, Ardon sank back onto the medical bed, staring at the alien ceiling's strange patterns. He'd come to Kursara expecting death. Instead, he'd ended a war, thwarted a coup, survived combat with 2 Zyran warriors, and somehow become an advisor to an alien queen. Harwin would be insufferable about this. I told you your mouth would either get you killed or save the galaxy, she'd say, probably with that smug grin of hers. Apparently, he'd managed both. The months ahead would be a minefield. Peace talks were always messy, especially between species with wildly different views on strength, honor, and justice. There'd be setbacks, arguments, maybe even a few assassination attempts from hardliners on both sides. But for the first time in 9 years, hope flickered, a fragile, stubborn spark born from a human, too pig-headed to fight, and a queen bold enough to kneel. Arden closed his eyes, letting the Zyran medical tech weave its magic. Tomorrow the real work began. Building peace was harder than waging war, but if a sarcastic human psychologist and a warrior queen could find common ground in an arena drenched in blood, maybe their species could too. The war was ending. The hard part was just beginning. 3 months into the negotiations, Ardan realized preventing interstellar war was easier than teaching Solera the art of compromise. What do you mean we can't just claim the Ori system? Solera demanded, her 6 eyes locked on the holographic star map, hovering between them, its glowing lines casting shadows across her study. It's strategically vital, resource-rich, and currently unoccupied. It's unoccupied because it's a memorial, Ardan explained, rubbing his temples against the familiar headache, sparked by explaining human sentiment to a species that mourned by conquering. 20 million humans died there in the war's first year. You can't just take it because it's convenient. They're dead, Solera countered, her voice blunt. They don't need it anymore. Ardan sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. Your Majesty, how would your people react if humans claimed Varkas? That would be an unforgivable insult, she said, her scales bristling. Varkas is where our first empress ascended. She paused, realization dawning in her violet eyes. Ah, I see. You're getting better at this. They were in Solera's private study, a sanctuary Ardan hadn't expected from a warrior queen. He'd assumed she'd conduct all business from her imposing throne room, but she favored this intimate space filled with ancient texts, star charts, and surprisingly sculptures that seemed almost artistic. You collect art, he'd asked the first time she brought him here. I collect victories, she'd corrected, her tone sharp. Each piece is from a conquered world. That's impressive and kind of unsettling, he'd replied. Now 3 months later, this room was their unofficial war room for peace. Formal talks with admirals and diplomats unfolded in grand halls dripping with ceremony, but the real progress, grueling compromises, and hard-won understanding happened here, just the two of them. The Terran delegations pushing for reparations again, Solera said, pulling up a document on her console. They want 40% of our titanium output for a decade. And your counteroffer is what? Death to anyone who dares ask, Ardan said, smirking. We need to work on your negotiation skills. Aim for something between nothing and murder. Solera leaned back in her massive chair, which still seemed too small for her towering frame. You humans are infuriating, she said, her voice laced with exasperation. You claim to want peace, but your demands are impossible. And you Zyran claim to be reasonable, but your idea of compromise is only destroy half their planets. Ardan shot back. I was being generous when I said half. She hurled a datapad at him. Ardan ducked, now practiced at dodging her projectiles. She'd discovered throwing things was a safer outlet than actual violence, and he'd gotten very good at evading them. You know, he said, retrieving the pad, most advisors don't have to worry about their boss braining them with office supplies. Most advisors aren't as aggravating as you, Solera retorted. You say that like it's not why you keep me around. She didn't deny it. Over the months, they'd fallen into a peculiar rhythm. She'd propose something aggressive. He'd explain why. It'd reignite the war. She'd lob something at him, and then they'd hash out a real solution. It was messy, dysfunctional, but it worked. A chime at the door interrupted them. Solera waved a hand and it slid open to reveal General Tavar, her most trusted advisor, and one of the few Zyran who hadn't tried to kill Ardan in the past 3 months. Your Majesty, Tavar said, his scales shifting to a respectful blue-green. We have a situation. When don't we? Solera asked, her tone dry. This one's different, Tavar said. A Terran ship has entered the disputed zone around Capra Station. They claim it's a rescue mission, but our scouts detected weapon signatures. Ardan's stomach plummeted. Capra Station was a powder keg, the site of the war's bloodiest clash. Both sides claimed it neither would budge, and they'd agreed to keep it neutral until the talks concluded. It's probably exactly what they say, Ardan said quickly. A rescue mission. There are still escape pods drifting in that system from the battle. Armed rescue missions? Tavar's tone dripped with skepticism. Have you seen that system? Ardan countered. It's a graveyard of debris, unexploded ordnance, and defense systems that don't know the war's on pause. Of course they're armed. Solera rose, her 3-meter frame making the room feel suddenly small. If this violates the ceasefire, it doesn't. Ardan interrupted, then caught himself realizing he'd just cut off the queen of the Zyran Empire. I mean, I'm sure it doesn't. Let me contact Admiral Harwin. There's an explanation. You have 1 hour, Solera said, her voice a low growl. If this is deception, it could destroy your people. I get it, Ardon said, exasperation creeping in. Can we try going 1 week without threatening genocide? That depends, Solera replied, on whether your species can go 1 week without giving me a reason to. Ardon hurried out, communicator already in hand. The walk to his quarters, strange to think he had quarters in the palace of humanity's greatest enemy, felt endless, each step heavy with dread. If someone human or Zyran was sabotaging the ceasefire, if hardliners were making a move. Admiral Harwin's face appeared on his screen, weary but sharp. Cole, I was expecting your call. Please tell me the ship in the Capra system is actually on a rescue mission. Ardon said, his voice tight. It is, Harwin confirmed. Captain Morin's daughter was on a science vessel, lost in the final battle. He got intel her pod might still be out there and went rogue, no authorization. Captain Morin's daughter was on a science vessel, lost in the final battle, Harwin said, her voice taut with fatigue. He got intel her pod might still be out there and went rogue, no authorization. No authorization from me. You mean? Ardon groaned, pinching the bridge of his nose. Admiral, we agreed to maintain the ceasefire. We agreed not to abandon our people, Harwin shot back. The Zyran won't see it that way. Then make them see it, Cole. Isn't that why you're there, to translate our messy human emotions into something they can wrap their heads around? She cut the call before he could respond. Ardon stood in his quarters, the space now strangely familiar, despite its alien angles. Zyran architecture, softened for human comfort, a bed scaled to his frame, a desk at the right height, even a coffee maker Solera had somehow sourced from the stars. She's going to kill me, he muttered, heading back to Solera's study, his steps heavy with the weight of another looming crisis. He found her in full war council mode, surrounded by a cadre of military advisors, their scales glinting under the study's harsh lights. The room fell silent as Ardon entered, every eye turning to him. The Terran ship's on a rescue mission, he announced, voice steady despite the tension. Captain Morin's daughter is trapped in a damaged escape pod. He's trying to save her. That's what they claim, General Tavar said, his tone laced with doubt. That's the truth, Ardon countered. I just confirmed it with Admiral Harwin. And we're to trust human words, another general, whose name Ardon hadn't bothered to learn, given his consistent unpleasantness, sneered, his scales flaring in disdain. You should trust the word of your queen's chosen advisor? Ardon shot back, his voice sharp but controlled. Unless you're suggesting Her Majesty made a mistake keeping me around. The general's scales flushed an angry red, but he held his tongue. Questioning Solera's judgment, even indirectly, was a political minefield. Show me the tactical display. Solera commanded, her voice cutting through the room like a blade. The hologram shifted, projecting the Capra system in real time. The Terran ship was armed, yes, but its search patterns were textbook rescue operations, recovery drones fanning out in precise arcs. They're really looking for survivors, Tavar said, surprise softening his skepticism. Humans will risk everything for one life, Ardon said, a wry smile tugging at his lips. It's one of our more admirable, if slightly insane qualities. Insane indeed, Solera murmured, her 6 violet eyes narrowing. The risk-to-reward ratio is absurd. Not to Captain Morin, Ardon replied. That's his daughter out there. Solera's gaze locked on him, something shifting in her expression, a flicker of understanding. His offspring, she said softly. Yes. She turned to her advisors. Send our scout ships to aid the search. Every Zyran in the room froze, staring at her. Your Majesty, Tavar ventured cautiously. You heard me, Solera said, her voice unyielding. If there are survivors from the battle, we will help recover them. It's the civilized thing to do. But they're humans, the unpleasant general began, his tone bordering on insubordination. They're survivors, Solera snapped, silencing him. And we are not barbarians, despite what Terran propaganda claims. Send the scouts, offer assistance. Make it clear this is a humanitarian gesture, not a military maneuver. The generals filed out, muttering among themselves, their scales shifting in shades of discontent. Ardon waited until the room was theirs alone. That was unexpected, he said, leaning against the desk. Was it? Solera asked, a faint smirk playing across her lips. You've spent 3 months explaining human emotional bonds to me. A parent risking all for their child is something even Zyron can grasp. Do you have offspring? Arden asked the question, slipping out before he could stop it. Too personal, but he'd learned Solera responded better to bluntness than diplomatic tiptoeing. No, she said simply, her voice tinged with a quiet weight. The throne demands sacrifices. I chose empire over family. That's a lonely choice, Ardan said softly, meeting her gaze. It was a necessary one, she replied, then added almost to herself, or it was. She moved to the window, gazing out at Karsara's sprawling city, its spires gleaming under the twin suns' fading light. Your species puzzles me, Ardan, she said. You're weak, fragile, short-lived, yet you'll throw everything away for someone who might already be gone. And your species puzzles me, Ardan said, stepping to her side, well beside and below, given their height difference. You're strong, nearly invincible, with centuries to live, yet you've forgotten that strength without connection is just existing, not living. Is that what you think I am? Solera asked, her voice low. Just existing? I think you've been alone on that throne for too long, Ardan said, his tone gentle but unflinching. And I think Lysera wouldn't have wanted that for you. Solera flinched at her sister's name, the wound still raw after months. You didn't know her, she said quietly. No, but I know you, Ardan replied. And if she was anything like you, she'd want you to be happy, not just powerful. Power is happiness, Solera said, but her voice lacked conviction. No, Ardan countered, power is power. Happiness is something else entirely. They stood in silence, the twin suns painting the city in hues of purple and gold, softening even the stark military structures into something almost beautiful. Tavar's voice crackled through the communication panel, breaking the moment. The rescue was successful. Captain Morn's daughter was recovered alive, along with 6 other Terran survivors, and unexpectedly 2 Zyran prisoners of war we didn't know had survived. Solera touched the panel, her voice steady. Bring the Zyran survivors here. Ensure the humans are returned to their ships safely. Yes, Your Majesty, Tavar replied. You're going to use this, Ardan said, a grin spreading across his face as he saw her plan. The joint rescue, Zyran and humans working together. It's a propaganda win for peace. Is everything a calculation to you? Solera asked, but amusement danced in her tone. Says the queen who told me every action is victory or defeat, Ardan shot back. Maybe you're learning there's a third option. Maybe I am, she admitted, turning to face him fully. Her presence, alien yet familiar, struck him anew. 3 months of arguing, dodging data pads, and somehow forging something akin to friendship. There's a ceremony tonight, she said suddenly. The Star Weave ceremony marking the Zyran's first voyage beyond our home system. I know, Ardan said. I wasn't invited. Figured a human at a Zyphan cultural event might spark a riot. You're invited now, Solera said, as my personal guest. Ardan blinked, caught off guard. Your personal guest. Won't that cause more of a riot? Probably, she said, her eyes glinting with mischief. But as you keep telling me, sometimes the risk is worth it. That evening, Ardan found himself in Zyran formal wear tailored to his human frame, standing in a grand ballroom filled with beings who'd spent 9 years trying to kill his kind. The stares ranged from curious to barely veiled hostility, but as Solera's guest, he was untouchable. No one would dare insult the queen by attacking her chosen companion. The Starweave ceremony was a revelation, blending military precision with unexpected artistry. Performances recounted the Zyran's first interstellar journey. Traditional combat displays moved like choreographed dances, and the music, once his ears adjusted to its alien tones, was strangely captivating. You're not mingling, Solera noted, appearing beside him with a grace that belied her towering size. Hard to mingle when half the room wants to dissect me, and the other half, what he wants to kill me, Ardan quipped. Only half want to kill you, she corrected, a smirk playing on her lips. The rest are genuinely curious. Oh, only half. That's comforting, he said, rolling his eyes. Her formal robes made her even more imposing than her armor, the fabric catching the light to highlight her scarification marks, transforming scars of conquest into something almost ethereal. Dance with me, she said abruptly. Ardan nearly choked on his drink. I'm sorry, Dance. It's tradition for the host to dance with their guest of honor, she said. You're my guest. That makes you honored by default. Solera. I'm half your height, Ardan protested. How's that supposed to work? Creatively, she said, taking his hand with a careful grip, mindful not to crush his fingers, and leading him to the dance floor. The music slowed its complex harmonies, filling the room, and every eye turned to them. "This is going to be a disaster," Ardon muttered. "Probably," Solera agreed, her voice light. "But as you taught me, disasters can be educational." The dance was awkward, the height difference rendering traditional moves impossible. Yet Solera adapted her movements fluid and deliberate, and Ardon followed, falling into her rhythm, as he had in their negotiations. They must have looked absurd, a warrior queen and a human advisor, fumbling for harmony across species. But somehow it worked. The sheer effort, the absurdity of their attempts shifted the room's atmosphere. "People are laughing," Ardon noted, glancing at the crowd. "Let them," Solera said. "Laughter's better than hostility." "When did you get all philosophical?" he asked, grinning. "When a certain irritating human kept forcing me to see things differently," she replied, her eyes glinting with warmth. The dance ended, and a hush fell before a single clap broke the silence. Then another, then more, not universal but enough. "Progress," Ardon said quietly. "Progress," Solera echoed. They slipped onto a balcony overlooking Carcera's glittering city, the night air cool against Ardon's skin. He shivered, and without hesitation, Solera draped part of her robe over him, the gesture unexpectedly intimate. "Your people are starting to accept this," Ardon said. "The peace, I mean. Some are, others never will. There will always be those who see strength only in conquest," she said, her voice low. "And you, what do you see strength in now?" She was silent for a long moment, her 6 eyes reflecting the starlight. "I see strength in a human who walked into certain death and refused to fight. In a captain who risked everything for his daughter. In choosing to build rather than destroy." "That's quite a shift for someone who conquered 112 worlds," Ardon said, raising an eyebrow. 112, she corrected, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "And yes, it is. You've corrupted me, Ardon Cole. Made me weak, made you stronger," he countered. "It takes more strength to change than to stay the same." Her gaze softened, starlight dancing in her eyes. "Do you ever regret it? Coming here, diving into this mess every day?" Ardon said, then smiled. "And also never. It's complicated. Everything with you is complicated," she said, her voice warm with amusement. Says the woman with 6 eyes and 4 arms trying to end a decades-long war with interpretive dance. Her laugh rumbled like distant thunder, a sound Ardon had grown oddly fond of. "We did look ridiculous. Completely ridiculous," he agreed. "Someone's definitely recorded it. We'll be a meme across both our species by tomorrow." "I don't know what a meme is," Solera said, "and I suspect I don't want to." They stood in comfortable silence, the city's glow stretching below them. 3 months ago, Ardon had been a prisoner here. Now he was what? An advisor, a friend, something more that neither could name. "Solera," he started, then faltered, the words too vast, too perilous. "Yes," she prompted, her eyes searching his. "Nothing," he said, chickening out. "Just thank you for tonight, for showing me your culture beyond conquest." She studied him, her gaze piercing. "You're lying. That's not what you wanted to say." "No," he admitted, "but it's what I should say. Since when do you say what you should instead of what you think?" she teased. "Since I realize some thoughts are too complicated even for me," he said, his voice softer now. She reached out her fingers, brushing his face with a gentleness that belied her strength. "Perhaps complicated isn't always bad," she said, her voice low, intimate. The moment stretched, a fragile bridge between possibility and impossibility. A human and a Zyran, architect of peace and queen of war, standing together as their species learn not to kill each other. "Your Majesty," Tavar's voice cut through from the doorway, shattering the moment. "The Terran delegation requests an emergency session." "There's been an incident." Solera straightened, the queen snapping back into place. "What kind of incident?" she demanded. "A Zyran colony ship entered Terran space," Tavar said. "They claim it was a navigation error, but the humans are treating it as aggression." Ardon's heart sank, a cold weight settling in his chest. 3 months of hard-won progress teetered on the edge of collapse, all because of one wayward ship with faulty star charts. "Assemble the council," Solera commanded, her voice a steel blade cutting through the tension. "And contact Admiral Harwin. Tell her I'm handling this personally." Tavar nodded and left his scales flickering with urgency. Solera turned to Ardon, her 6 violet eyes softened by a trace of regret. "It seems our evening's cut short. The story of our, whatever this is," Ardon said, a wry smile masking his unease, "always interrupted by the threat of war." Whatever this is, Solera echoed a hint of amusement in her tone. Is that the official human term? It's my term, he replied, for things that don't fit neatly like us. Especially us. She extended a hand, a gesture she'd learned held weight for humans. Come, she said, her voice warm yet resolute. Let's keep our species from destroying each other. Just another Tuesday for Ardon Cole, he muttered, taking her hand, its cool, textured surface now familiar. As they strode back into the palace, their reflection caught in a window. An impossible pair, too alien, too unlikely, yet bound by a shared mission. The war was ending slowly, painfully, with victories, hard-fought, and setbacks lurking. But something new was rising from the ashes, something complicated, defying categories, with the power to save or doom both their peoples. Only time would tell. The emergency session dragged until dawn, a grueling marathon of diplomacy. The Zyran colony ship's incursion was indeed a navigation error, a young pilot new to the sector using outdated charts. But human paranoia and Zyran pride had nearly sparked a shooting war. Ardon and Solera spent hours diffusing the crisis, Ardane reasoning with the Terrans that not every Zyran move was an invasion. Solera convincing her people that entering sovereign space, even by mistake, demanded an apology, not defiance. By the time the storm passed, both were drained, slumped in Solera's study, amidst a battlefield of documents and treaty drafts. This is unsustainable, Solera said, sinking into her chair, in a way that would have shocked her court, less a queen, more a weary soul. We can't lurch from crisis to crisis over every misstep. Welcome to peace, Ardon said, equally exhausted, rubbing his eyes. It's like war, but with more paperwork and fewer obvious enemies. I'm starting to see why my ancestors chose conquest, she said, her voice dry. It's simpler. Simpler, sure, Ardon replied. Better not even close. She met his gaze across the table strewn with the debris of diplomatic warfare. How do your people do it? Maintain peace among so many factions. Badly, mostly, he admitted, a tired grin breaking through. We bicker, negotiate, compromise, build systems to manage our squabbles. It's messy, inefficient, and endlessly frustrating, but it beats the alternative. Solera stood stretching her forearms in a motion that reminded Ardon of a massive lethal cat, a predator at rest but never tamed. Walk with me, she said, where he asked, pushing himself up. Somewhere that isn't here. They ended up in the palace gardens, a place Ardon hadn't known existed. It was otherworldly, with plants swaying without wind and flowers humming in subsonic harmonies that teased the edge of human hearing. This was Lysera's place, Solera said softly, her voice heavy with memory. She designed it, nurtured it. I've kept it alive all these years, but I rarely come here. Why not, Ardon asked, stepping carefully along paths not meant for human feet. Too many ghosts, she murmured. They walked in silence, passing fountains that defied gravity in ways that made Ardon's head spin if he stared too long. Can I ask you something, he said finally. You always do. Solera replied, a faint smile in her voice. What really happened with Lysera? She stopped beside a tree with silver bark and leaves like frozen flames. She died, Solera said, her voice flat. I killed her. That's the story. I don't think it is. Ardon pressed gently. She sighed, her gaze distant. What do you want me to say? That it was complicated, that she asked me to do it. She was dying poisoned by an assassin meant for me. She begged me to make her death mean something. Ardon stayed silent, waiting, giving her space to unravel the truth. She knew the Empire needed strength to survive. Solera continued, her voice barely above a whisper. But she also knew I wouldn't take the throne while she lived. So she made me promise, in exchange for her life, I'd unite our people, make them strong enough to face any threat. And I did. I conquered worlds, crushed enemies, built an empire spanning half the galaxy. Every victory, every death, it was because she believed I could bear that weight. Ardon nodded, sensing the burden in her words. You kept that promise. I did. She said, her eyes glinting with pain. But she made me promise something else. When the Empire was secure, when we were safe, I'd find another way, a path beyond endless war. She looked at him, her gaze piercing. I think she would have liked you with your stubborn belief that words can outshine weapons. I think I'd have liked her too, Ardon said, his voice soft. They walked on, and Ardon noticed Solera subtly steering him away from plants that might harm a human, her pace slowing to match his shorter stride. 3 months together had woven habits neither acknowledged. The negotiations are nearly done, he said. A few more weeks and we'll have a formal treaty. Then I go home. You rule your empire and we hope no one starts shooting again. Is that what you want? Solera asked, stopping to face him. To go home, Ardon hesitated, the question cutting deeper than expected. Did he want to return to Earth to a life of academic conferences and occasional military gigs? I don't know, he admitted. Being here doing this, it's the most important thing I've ever done. But it's exhausting. I'm not built for constant crisis. You've done well enough, she said, her tone warm but firm. I've survived, he corrected. There's a difference. Solera turned to him, fully her towering frame softened by the garden's glow. Would you stay if I asked as my advisor, or whatever you wanted to be? The weight of her words hung between them, heavy with unspoken possibilities. Solera Ardon said, his voice catching. I know all the reasons it's impossible. Different species lifespans, everything. But these past months working with you, arguing, dodging your data pads, you really need to work on that. By the way, it's the first time since Lacera that I haven't felt alone. Ardon took her hand in both of his, her cool textured skin now a comfort rather than a strangeness. I don't want you to be alone, he said. But I also don't want to be a stand-in for your sister or some symbol of peace. You're not a stand-in, Solera said, her voice fierce yet tender. You're you, irritating, brilliant, fragile, stubborn you. Not exactly romantic qualities, he said, a laugh escaping him, despite the gravity of the moment. They are to someone surrounded by people who only say what I want to hear, she countered. Ardon laughed again, the absurdity of it all washing over him. Here he was in an alien garden, bearing his soul to a queen who could tear him apart, discussing feelings that shouldn't exist but did. This is insane, he said. Utterly insane, she agreed, her eyes glinting with shared defiance. If anyone found out, both our species would riot. It could destroy everything we've built. It could, he said, their hands still entwined, neither willing to let go. I'll stay, Ardon said finally, until the peace is stable. Officially as your advisor, unofficially as whatever this is. That could take years, Solera said, a challenge in her tone. I've got time, he replied. Humans may not live as long as Ziren, but we're pretty good at making our moments count. She smiled, her too many teeth grin, now a familiar warmth. Then we should get back to work, she said, before someone notices we're gone and starts another crisis. Probably Ardon agreed, but neither moved. Ardon, she said, her voice soft. Yes, thank you for seeing me as more than a conqueror, for believing I could be better. Thank you for proving me right. They walked back to the palace, hands no longer touching, but bound by something stronger. Treaties awaited cultures to bridge peace, to forge from war's ashes. It was complicated, everything about them was. But Ardon had learned that the most complicated things were often the most worth doing. The assassination attempt came during the treaty signing, because of course it did. Ardon saw it unfold in agonizing slow motion, a Zyran server approaching with ceremonial wine, their posture shifting subtly, scales flickering in a pattern that screamed neural override. He had 1 second to act. Solera move, he shouted, lunging forward, tackling the queen with all the force his human frame could muster, a futile gesture against her 3-meter bulk, like a sparrow slamming into a storm. But it was enough to nudge her aside, the neural disruptor beam grazing her shoulder instead of her primary heart cluster. The room erupted into chaos. Guards swarmed the attacker, diplomats dove for cover, and Ardon found himself pinned beneath Solera's unconscious weight, her mass crushing his already battered ribs. Not how I planned to go out, he wheezed, struggling to breathe. General Tavar was there in seconds, lifting Solera with careful strength as medics rushed in. Ardon scrambled to his feet, his mind racing through the implications. An assassination attempt at the treaty, signing someone desperately wanted this war to continue. Is she? He started. Alive, Tavar confirmed, his scales a worried orange. The disruptor scrambled her nervous system. But it's not fatal. She'll recover, though it'll take time. Who was the assassin? Ardon asked, his voice tight. Dead, Tavar said. Toxin capsule before we could question them. He looked at Ardon, something like respect in his gaze. You saved her life. I delayed her death by a second, Ardon said, deflecting. Your medics did the rest. That second was enough, Tavar said. Admiral Harwin's face appeared on the main screen, her expression grim. Dr. Cole, what's the situation? Assassination attempt on Queen Solera, Ardon said. She's alive, but out of commission. The assassin's dead, Zyran. But that doesn't mean much. Could be a faction pushing for war, human extremists, or Kalarath supporters making a play. The treaty's on hold, Harwin said, her voice heavy. Ardon glanced at the room where Terran and Zyran officials eyed each other with fresh suspicion. Admiral, keep our people calm. This wasn't us. You're sure, she asked? I'm sure someone wants us to think it was, he replied. That's not the same thing, Harwin nodded. I'll do what I can. But Cole, if Solera dies, she won't, he said, more conviction than he felt. I won't let her. The next hours were a blur. Ardon found himself in the medical wing arguing with the Zyran doctors who bristled at a human near their queen. He won through sheer stubbornness and Tavar's backing. Her neural pathways are in chaos, the lead physician explained, displaying a holographic scan of Solera's brain. Her 6 optical nerves fired erratically, locked in feedback loops, keeping her unconscious. We can stabilize her, but recovery could take months. What if we try something else? Ardon said, studying the scan. His xenobiology knowledge was limited, but neural patterns were his domain. Look at this pattern, Ardon said, pointing to the holographic scan of Solera's brain. It's not chaos, it's recursive. The disruptor didn't just scramble her neurons, it trapped them in a loop. Loops can be broken. We just need the right frequency to interrupt the pattern. The lead physician's 4 eyes narrowed, skepticism etched in his scales. You're suggesting we use another disruptor to fix disruptor damage? I'm suggesting targeted electromagnetic pulses to reset specific neural pathways. Ardon clarified, his voice steady despite his limited xenobiology knowledge. It's worked on humans with similar trauma. Zyran brains aren't human, the physician snapped. No, but neural patterns follow universal laws, Ardon countered. Let me try. Absolutely not, the physician said. You could kill her. She's dying anyway, Ardon said bluntly, his gaze unwavering. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but those loops will burn out her brain eventually. Let me try. The argument raged for another hour, a battle of wills under the medical wing's sterile lights, until Tavar stepped in. The humans earned the right to try, he said, his scales a resolute blue-green. He saved her life once today. Ardon spent the next 6 hours with the medical team, adapting human neural techniques to Zyran physiology. It was grueling, nerve-wracking work, each adjustment a gamble, each pulse a potential death sentence. His hands shook with exhaustion, but he pressed on, driven by the image of Solera's 6 eyes lifeless if he failed. Slowly, agonizingly, the pattern shifted. The loops unraveled one by one until Solera's eyes fluttered open, all 6 unfocused, clouded with confusion. Ardon, she whispered, her voice frail but unmistakably hers. I'm here, he said, taking her hand, heedless of the medical staff's stares. Her cool, textured skin grounded him. You're safe. The assassin's dead. The treaty signing's on hold until you recover. She tried to sit up, collapsed back, and growled a low, frustrated rumble. I can't. My body won't move. Neural disruptor, Ardon explained. It scrambled your nervous system. You'll need weeks to heal. We don't have weeks, Solera said, her voice tight. Without me, the hardliners, both sides, will do nothing, Ardon interrupted, squeezing her hand. Because I won't let them. Rest. Heal. I'll handle it. Solera's eyes sharpened, a faint spark of her old fire. You're going to manage both the Zyran Empire and the Terran Coalition. I'm going to do what I do best, Ardon said, a tired grin breaking through. Be so damn irritating everyone focuses on me instead of starting a war. She laughed weakly, the sound a fragile echo of her thunderous mirth. That's a terrible plan. It's worked so far, he said, his voice softening. Over the next days, Ardon became the de facto mediator, a human holding the fragile peace between 2 species. Without Solera's commanding presence, the Zyran Council fractured. Some demanded swift retaliation for the assassination attempt. Others saw her incapacitation as a chance to derail the treaty. The Terrans were no better, with voices in the coalition clamoring for preemptive strikes, while the Zyran floundered leaderless. Admiral Harwin held them back, but only just. Ardon took charge in Solera's study, navigating crisis after crisis with no formal authority. Yet being the human who saved the Queen and her chosen advisor gave him enough leverage to keep the galaxy from imploding. You look like hell, Solera said, during one of his visits to her medical suite, her voice stronger but still strained. Thanks, Ardon said, collapsing into the chair beside her bed, 40 hours of sleeplessness weighing on him. You really know how to charm a guy. Your counsel is exhausting, she said. How do you deal with them? Usually by threatening to execute anyone who annoys me, she replied, a faint smirk playing on her lips. Yeah, well, I'm stuck with logic and reasoning, Ardon said like some kind of civilized sap. How dreadful for you. She teased, her 6 eyes glinting with amusement. How are you feeling? He asked, his tone softening. Frustrated, she admitted, attempting to lift a cup of water. Her secondary arms trembled, barely managing the task. My legs are useless, my arms weak as wet paper. The doctors say another week before I'm mobile. Then we've got a week to figure out who tried to kill you, Ardon said, pulling out a datapad. The list is long, but I'm narrowing it down. The assassin was from Karsara's southern continent. Scale patterns confirm it. Military training, but not active duty. And they had access to a neural disruptor, which is tightly controlled tech. That describes thousands? Solera said, her voice skeptical. True, Ardon agreed, but factor in the timing, the specific disruptor model, and their precise aim for your heart cluster, and the list shrinks. Fast. Her eyes sharpened, a predator's focus returning. Someone with medical knowledge. Or access to your sealed medical records, Ardon added. Only your personal physicians have those. And the Council of Worlds for succession protocols. Solera's gaze darkened. Counselor Thrice, she said, the name heavy with realization. Ardon nodded. He's been loud about your weakness since you backed peace, and his nephew's stationed at the facility storing neural disruptors. That's circumstantial, she said, but her tone suggested she was convinced. It is, Ardon admitted, which is why I've set a trap. Solera's eyebrow arched. Without telling me you've been a bit busy being half paralyzed, he said, grinning, plus plausible deniability. If this goes south, you knew nothing. What kind of trap, she asked, her voice sharp. The kind where I'm publicly exhausted and visibly vulnerable, Ardon said. I've also let slip to certain people that I'm sitting on evidence about the assassination I haven't shared. You're using yourself as bait, Solera said, her eyes narrowing. It's working, he replied. 2 attempts on my life in the past day. Solera pushed herself up, sheer will overriding her weakened body. You're being targeted, and you didn't tell me. You need to heal, Ardon said, unyielding. Besides, they were pathetic attempts. The first was poisoned food. I caught it because the toxin smells to humans, but not Zyron. The second was a malfunctioning maintenance drone I dodged by not standing where I was supposed to. Ardon, she said, her voice tight with worry. I'm being careful. Tavar's got guards on me even if I don't see them. Each attempt gives us more clues. I don't like you risking yourself, she said, echoing his own stubbornness. Not when I fought battles in person instead of from safety. That's different, she insisted. I'm nearly indestructible. You're fragile, weak, squishy, important. The word hung between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. Ardon took her hand again, her grip careful even in her weakened state. I'm going to find who did this, he said. Then we'll sign that treaty, end this war for good, and figure out what comes next. I know what I want to come next, Solera said, her voice soft but fierce. Ardon, I nearly died. A second more and that beam would have killed me. All I could think as I fell was that I never told you, Solera. I love you, she said, the words spilling out like a dam breaking. I know it's impossible. Different species lifespans everything. But with you, I'm not a queen, not a conqueror, not a symbol. I'm just me, the person I might have been if life had been different. Ardon's brain running on caffeine and adrenaline for days ground to a halt. You what? She repeated, softer but unwavering. I love you. The words hit like a shockwave. I love you too, he said, the confession rushing out before he could stop it. He slowed, meeting her gaze. It's insane, impossible, probably the worst idea we've ever had. But I love you. I think I have since you threw that first data pad at my head. That's a strange basis for love, she said, a weak smile showing too many teeth. We're strange people, he replied, grinning despite the chaos. An explosion rocked the medical facility, alarm screaming as distant weapons fire echoed. Stay here, Ardon said, standing, grabbing a Zyron plasma rifle from the wall, too large for him, but better than nothing. Ardon, don't you dare, Solera protested, struggling to rise. But he was already moving. Tavar's voice crackled over the comms. Dr. Cole, we have a breach. Multiple hostiles heading for the medical wing. Thrice is likely behind it. They're using military tactics and gear. Ardon glanced back at Solera, who was forcing herself upright, her legs trembling. You need to go, she said. Get to safety. Like hell, he shot back. If they want you, they go through me. Ardon, you can't fight a strike team, she said, her voice desperate. Watch me, he said, gripping the rifle. The door exploded inward. Ardon fired the recoil, nearly toppling him, but the blast forced the attackers to take cover. Doctor. Ardon called, a voice called Counselor Thrice, of course leading the charge himself. Step aside, this doesn't concern you. Everything about her concerns me, Ardon shouted, firing again to keep them pinned. You'd kill a queen who's building a better future. You'd die for a creature who raised your worlds, killed millions. Thrice sneered. I'd die for the person trying to make things right, Ardon said. But I'd rather live, so how about you surrender? Thrice laughed, a cold, grating sound. Humans and their humor. Even facing death, you jest. It's called a coping mechanism, Ardon quipped. You should try it. The attackers rushed in, overwhelming in number. The rifle was knocked from Ardon's hands, and 6 armed Zaren soldiers loomed over him. But he'd bought time. Behind him, Solera actually stood, her body trembling with effort fueled by sheer will and fury. You dare attack your queen. Her voice, though weak, carried absolute authority. You're no queen, Thrice spat, stepping into the room. You're a weak fool who's forgotten what it means to be Zyran. And you're a coward who strikes at the injured, hiding behind others' blades, she retorted. Thrice raised his weapon. Not this time. Ardon moved instinctively, stepping between them. You'll have to go through me, gladly Thrice said, firing. Ardon braced for pain, for darkness. It never came. He opened his eyes to a shimmering energy shield around him, projected from Solera's trembling hand. She stood tall, her body shaking, but her 6 eyes blazing with defiance. You want Zyran strength, she said to Thrice. Here it is. What followed was both beautiful and terrifying. Despite her injuries, her faltering nervous system, Solera moved raw determination given form. She launched at the attackers, not with her usual grace, but with a ferocity that shattered their ranks. Ardon grabbed the fallen rifle, laying down cover fire to pin Thrice while Solera dispatched his soldiers. Tavar and reinforcements arrived moments later, but the fight was already over. Thrice lay on the ground, Solera's foot on his chest, her claws at his throat. Yield, she commanded. Never, he spat. Kill me and become the tyrant you were meant to be. No, she said, stepping back. You'll face a public trial. Let the galaxy see what fear and hatred breed. As guards hauled Thrice away, Solera collapsed. Ardon caught her, barely keeping them both upright, his own strength nearly spent. That was incredibly stupid, he said, panting. I learned it from the best, she replied, her voice weak but warm. We need to get you back to the medical bed, he said, but she grabbed his arm, her 6 eyes locking onto his with an intensity that stopped his heart. You were going to die for me, she said. Seemed like a good idea at the time, he said, forcing a grin. And what you said before, I love you too, the words spilled out raw and unfiltered. It's insane, impossible, probably the worst idea we've ever had, but I love you. I think I have since you chucked that first data pad at my head. That's a strange basis for love, she said, a pained smile revealing her familiar toothy grin. We're strange people, he replied, his voice soft but sure. She laughed, then winced, her injuries flaring. What now? Now we get you healed, Ardon said. We sign the treaty, end this war, and figure out how to make this work, an alien queen and a human advisor. 2 people who found each other in the chaos of peace. Tavar cleared his throat, reminding them of his presence. Your Majesty, Dr. Cole, the medical team needs to treat you both. As medics separated them, Ardon caught Solera's gaze one last time. She smiled, that toothy grin, too many sharp edges, yet now a sight he cherished, warm and fierce in its familiarity. The next week was controlled chaos, a whirlwind of tension and revelation. Thrice's public trial broadcast across Terran and Zyran space was a spectacle of undeniable evidence. He hadn't just orchestrated the assassination attempt on Solera, but had woven a web of incidents to sabotage the peace process. His testimony exposed a shadowy network of hardliners, human and Zyran, united to prolong the war. Some driven by greed, others by ideology, and some simply lost without an enemy to define them. The revelations ironically bolstered the peace effort. Nothing binds former foes like the discovery they've been played by the same puppet masters. The treaty signing, when it finally came, felt almost understated after the storm. Ardan stood beside Solera as she signed for the Zyran Empire, her four hands steady despite her lingering injuries. Across the table, Admiral Harwin signed for the Terran Coalition, her pen strokes sealing 9 years of war with quiet hope. The celebration that followed was restrained but genuine, humans in Zyran, mingling not yet at ease, but trying. It was a fragile start. So Harwin said, sidling up to Arden during the reception, her eyes glinting with knowing amusement. "I hear you're sticking around to help with the treaty's rollout. Someone's got to—" Arden said, his gaze drifting to Solera, who stood among dignitaries regal, despite her still healing wounds. "That's not why you're staying," Harwin said, her tone teasing, but pointed. Ardan sighed, a wry smile tugging at his lips. "No, it's not. You know it's impossible, right?" she said. "The biological differences alone—" "Admiral," he cut in, "I just helped end a 9-year war between species that couldn't even talk without shooting. I think I've got a handle on impossible." Harwin studied him, then grinned. "You've always been too smart for your own good, Cole. Just try not to spark another war." "I'll do my best," he said, chuckling. As the reception wound down, Arden found himself back in Solera's study. Their study, really, after months of shared battles over treaties and thrown datapads. Solera stood by the window, the city's glow framing her silhouette. "The treaty's signed," she said, her voice soft but resonant. "The war's over, officially." "Yeah," Ardan said, joining her, craning his neck to meet her 6 violet eyes. "It'll take years for hearts and minds to catch up, but it's a start. It's a start," she echoed, turning to face him. "In us." "What kind of start do we have?" Ardan stepped closer, the height difference, a constant reminder of their differences. "The complicated kind," he said. "The kind where we figure out how to be together when everything biology, culture, history says we shouldn't." "Not everything," Solera said, her voice warm. "We both dive into danger without thinking. We're both too stubborn to quit. We both believe in something better than what we were handed." "When you put it like that," Ardan said, grinning, "we're practically the same species." She reached down, her claws carefully retracted, and touched his face with a gentleness that belied her strength. "This won't be easy," she said. "My people will resist. Yours will too. Biology itself fights us. Since when do we do?" "Easy," Ardan replied, his tone light, but his eyes earnest. "True," she said, her smile showing too many teeth, yet somehow perfect. "So what's our first challenge?" "Well," he said, ticking off on his fingers, "we need sleeping arrangements that don't end with me crushed. Food we can both eat without dying. Navigating the political fallout of the galaxy's most improbable romance. Oh, and convincing everyone this isn't some elaborate scheme." "Is that all?" she teased. "Nope," he added. "We also need to figure out how to kiss when you're twice my height and have a few too many teeth." Her laugh rumbled like distant thunder, a sound Ardan had come to love. "That might be the toughest one yet. We'll figure it out," he said. "We ended a war. How hard can a little interspecies logistics be?" 6 months later, Ardan had his answer very hard. "I'm not saying the summit's a bad idea," he said, pacing their shared quarters, a marvel of engineering tailored for human and Zyran needs. "I'm saying holding it on a planet where the gravity will literally crush me is a terrible plan." "We can get you an exosuit," Solera suggested, glancing up from documents on a couch that looked like a small fortress to Ardan's human scale. "An exosuit I'd wear for 3 days straight," he said, wincing. "My spine's got some strong opinions about that." "Then we pick another planet," she said. "But every world's wrong for someone too hot for humans, too cold for Zyran, too much methane for both." This was their life now, not just diplomatic marathons, but the endless negotiation of existing together. Separate, sleeping areas linked by a shared space meals, prepared two ways tech bridging their vastly different scales, yet through it all they were happy, genuinely, improbably happy. "What if we held it on a ship?" Ardan suggested. "Neutral ground-controlled environment." "That could work," Solera said, reaching down to lift him onto the couch beside her, a move they'd perfected over weeks to avoid bruising him. "You always find a way." "It's my thing," he said, settling in. "That and falling for alien queens who could kill me with a flick of their, whatever you call those fingers." I don't have fingers like yours, she said amused. You know what I mean? He shot back, grinning. She curled around him, her massive form a careful, warm shelter. Do you ever regret it? Us never, he said firmly. You, how could I regret the best thing that's ever happened to me, she said. The war ending was the best thing, he teased. No, she corrected, her voice soft but sure. The war ending was necessary. You were the best thing. They sat in silence, the binary sunset painting their window in vibrant hues. Tomorrow would bring new battles, resistance to their bond, whispers of betrayal or manipulation. But tonight they had this. That first day in the arena, Solera said you came because you were curious. What were you really curious about? Ardon thought back, the memory sharp despite feeling like another lifetime. I wanted to know if you were the monster everyone claimed or if there was more. And there was so much more. Complexity, pain, a capacity for growth I never expected. You saw all that in one day, she asked, her eyes glinting with starlight. I suspected it, he said. It took months to confirm. And I'm still finding new things, like yesterday when I discovered you snore when you sleep on your left side. She pushed him gently, her scales flushing. I do not snore. You do, he insisted, grinning. Sounds like a starship engine warming up. Says the man who talks in his sleep, she countered. No, Admiral, I won't wear the ceremonial headdress. It makes me look like a pineapple. Ardon groaned, laughing. I said that out loud. In my defense, that headdress did make me look like a pineapple. Their laughter filled the quarters, a sound that made the political pressures, biological hurdles, in constant scrutiny, worth it. A chime at the door broke the moment. Tavar entered, his expression grave. Your Majesty, Dr. Cole, we have a situation. Of course we do, Ardon muttered. What now? A ship's arrived at the border, Tavar said. It's transmitting Zyran royal codes from 200 years ago. Solera went rigid, her scales paling. That's impossible. Those codes were deactivated after Lysera's death. Tavar nodded. But they're active, and the ship's requesting you, Your Majesty, specifically. Ardon felt Solera tense beside him, her 6 eyes wide with a mix of hope and dread. It could be a trap, he said, someone using old codes to get close. Perhaps, Tavar said, projecting an image, a piece of fabric, with an intricate, unmistakable pattern. Solera gasped. That's Lysera's work. She was the only one who could weave that design. I destroyed every trace of it after she died. All you knew of, Tavar said carefully. Your Majesty, her body was never recovered in the succession's chaos. I saw it vaporized, Solera insisted, her voice shaking. I saw the explosion. You saw an explosion, Tavar corrected gently. You assumed a vaporization. Ardon stood, moving to see her face, her eyes a storm of hope and terror. We should investigate, he said quietly, if only to prove it's a trick. Solera rose, her decision hardening like steel. Prepare my ship, we go now. Your Majesty. That may not be wise, Tavar began. I don't care about wisdom, she said, her voice raw. If there's even a chance. She steadied herself. We go. Ardon, don't try to stop me. 3 hours later, they approached the mystery ship, an ancient Zyran design patched together with grit and makeshift repairs. One life sign, Tavar reported. Zyran, but odd. Like they've been in stasis for centuries. Open a channel, Solera commanded, her voice tight. The screen flickered and Ardon heard Solera's sharp intake of breath. The face was older, scarred by time and hardship, but unmistakable, the same face from the grainy image Ardon had seen months ago. Hello, Sister, Lysera said, her voice soft but clear. Sorry I'm late. Travel arrangements were complicated. Solera made a sound Ardon had never heard, a raw, wrenching blend of sob and roar. You're dead, she whispered. I killed you. You tried to kill me, Lysera corrected gently, as I asked you to, but your aim was off deliberately, I think. The blade hit my secondary heart, not my primary. Enough to convince everyone I was gone, not enough to end me. The explosion provided cover. Friends who shared my vision of peace helped me escape. I've been in the outer territories waiting, watching. When I heard about the peace treaty, about you changing, about this human who somehow reached the sister I thought was lost forever, I knew it was time to come home. 200 years, Solera whispered, her voice trembling with a mix of anguish and wonder. You let me believe you were dead for 2 centuries. You needed to believe it, Lysera said gently. Her two violet eyes, Ardon noted the genetic quirk steady and kind. You needed the anger, the guilt, the fire it gave you to unite our people. If you'd known I lived, you'd have been torn between two paths. This way, you walked yours fully. I conquered worlds, Solera said, her voice raw. I killed billions. You saved our people from extinction, Lysera countered. And now, with Dr. Cole's help, you're saving them from becoming monsters. Lysera turned to Ardon, her gaze warm but piercing. You must be Ardon, the human who did the impossible. I just talked a lot, Ardon said, deflecting with a grin. Your sister did the heavy lifting. Talking was the heavy lifting for her, Lysera said, her smile bright with amusement. May I come aboard? I'd like to hug my sister, if she'll allow it. Solera couldn't speak, her 6 eyes glistening as she nodded. As they waited for Lysera to dock, Solera gripped Ardon's hand, her strength nearly crushing despite her care. She's alive, she murmured over and over. She's alive. How do you feel about that? Ardon asked, wincing at the pressure but holding her gaze. I don't know, she admitted, her voice a tangle of emotions. Relieved, angry, happy, all at once. Sounds about right, he said, offering a small reassuring smile. The reunion was everything Ardon expected, and more a storm of emotion given form. The sisters embraced Solera's forearms, enveloping Lysera, then pulling back as if to confirm she was real, only to embrace her again. Words in ancient Zyran spilled out too raw for Ardon's translator to parse. Tears fell, and for a moment it seemed a fight might erupt before dissolving into another fierce hug. Finally, they parted enough to speak. Why now? Solera demanded, her voice thick with centuries of pain. Why reveal yourself now? Because you don't need the guilt anymore, Lysera said. You found a new path, a better one. And frankly, I was tired of hiding. She glanced at Ardon, her eyes twinkling. I also wanted to meet the human who did what I never could, showing you strength and compassion can coexist. I didn't do it alone, Ardon said, his voice soft but firm. She had to be willing to see it. But you made her willing, Lysera said. That's the miracle. For hours, the sisters talked, unraveling 2 centuries of separation of lives lived in parallel. Lysera had spent her exile among refugees, forging small communities in the outer territories, living the peace she'd always championed. I have a partner, she said at one point, her voice warm with memory. Another exile. We have children. You're an Aunt Solera. Solera made that sound again, a raw, wrenching blend of sob and roar. Children, she whispered. 3 grown now with children of their own, Lysera said. They know about you. They'd love to meet you if you were willing. Yes, Solera said, her voice breaking. Of course, Ardon watched their reconnection, feeling both part of it and apart from it. This was their healing, their moment. Yet Solera kept reaching for him, her hand finding his, grounding herself in his presence. So Lysera said eventually, her gaze flicking between them with a knowing smile. A human and a Zyran. That's gotta be logistically interesting. We manage, Ardon said dryly, a grin tugging at his lips. I bet you do, Lysera said, chuckling. Solera was always creative when she wanted something. Can we not discuss my relationship with my advisor? Solera said, her scales flushing, a faint pink embarrassment Ardon had learned. Advisor Lysera laughed, a bright musical sound. Sister, the way you look at him isn't how queens look at advisors. How do I look at him? Solera asked, her tone a mix of defiance and curiosity. Like he hung the stars just for you to conquer, Lysera said. Ardon choked on his drink, coughing. That's vivid, but accurate. I've been monitoring communications, Lysera said, her eyes sparkling. The great Queen Solera, conqueror of 112 worlds, gets all soft-voiced, talking to one particular human. I do not get soft-voiced, Solera protested, her scales deepening in color. You absolutely do, Ardon said, grinning. It's adorable. Solera lobbed a cushion at him, which he dodged with practiced ease. I am not adorable, she said. I am fierce and terrible. Fiercely adorable and terribly in love, Lysera corrected, her smile widening. The conversation stretched deep into the night cycle plans forming for Lysera's gradual return to Zyran society. It would be fraught. Her reappearance could destabilize the Empire, but it also held the power to heal old wounds. I want to join the peace process, Lysera said. Not as a leader, that's your role now, but as a symbol that change is possible, that enemies can become family again. That metaphor is a bit heavy-handed, Ardon noted, smirking. Humans love heavy-handed metaphors, Lysera replied, her tone playful. I've studied your species. You wear your emotions on your clothes and those little rectangular devices you carry everywhere. Those are phones, Ardon said, laughing, and that's an oversimplification of human culture. Is it though, Lysera teased? Their debate over human versus Zyran communication styles was cut short by Tavar's interruption. Your Majesty, he said, his scales shifting to a tense gray, we're receiving priority communications from Earth and the Zyran Council. They demand to know why you've gone to the border. Tell them we're exploring a diplomatic opportunity, Solera said, her voice calm but firm. They're insisting on immediate answers. Let them insist, she said. I'm busy having a family reunion. Ardon stood stretching. I should handle this. It's what advisors do, right, Ardon? Solera said, talk to your sister. You've got 200 years to catch up on. I'll make sure our governments don't panic and restart the war, he said, heading out. For the next 2 hours, Ardon waged diplomatic warfare, assuring all that no, the Queen hadn't been kidnapped. This wasn't a coup. Everything was fine, and yes, a full explanation was coming. When he returned to Solera's quarters on the ship, he found the sisters sitting in silence, simply existing together after centuries apart. All calm, Solera asked as he entered. Mostly, Ardon said, collapsing into a chair. I promised Harwin a full report and convinced the Zyran Council you haven't lost your mind. My dead sister's alive, Solera said, her voice soft with wonder. I'm in love with a human trying to turn a warrior empire into a peaceful federation. That sounds like madness. The best kind of madness, Lysera said, her eyes bright. The kind that reshapes the galaxy. She stood to leave. I should return to my ship. We'll meet tomorrow to plan my return. Stay, Solera said quickly, her voice raw. Please, I don't want you to disappear again. I won't, Lysera promised. But you need time to process this. And you need time with him. She nodded at Ardon. 2 centuries of guilt is a lot to unpack. You'll need support. After Lysera left, Solera sat in silence, her 6 eyes distant. Ardon sat with her waiting. She's alive, she said finally, her voice barely a whisper. She is, he said softly. I carried her death for 2 centuries, she said. I built an empire on that guilt. You built an empire because it needed building, Ardon said. The guilt just shaped how you did it. She looked at him, her gaze piercing. How are you so wise about this? I'm not, he said, smiling. I'm just good at seeing patterns. And the pattern's clear. You and Lysera both wanted the same thing, safety for your people. You just took different paths. Now maybe you can merge them, a warrior and a peacemaker. Sounds like a hell of a partnership. Like a human and a Zyran, she said, her voice warm. Exactly like that, he agreed. She pulled him close, her touch careful as always. Thank you, she said, for being here, for seeing past my guilt, for helping me become someone my sister could return to. You became that person yourself, Ardon said. I just argued with you a lot along the way. You did? She said, a smile breaking through. You still do. It's part of my charm, he teased. It is, she agreed, her voice soft. Somehow impossibly it is. They sat on the observation deck, stars spinning past as the ship held position. Tomorrow would bring challenges, reintegrating Lysera, navigating political fallout, forging lasting peace. But tonight, Solera had her sister back. The war was over, and love had bloomed in the unlikeliest soil. That first day in the arena, she said, did you really know about Lysera? Or was it a guess, an educated guess, Ardon admitted. Pattern analysis, psychological profiling. A smart guess. You risked your life on a guess, she said, her eyes wide. I risked it on knowing you were more than you seemed, he said. Lysera was just the method, and if you'd been wrong, she asked. Then I'd have died knowing I tried to end a war with words, not weapons, he said. There are worse ways to go. You're insane, she said, her voice warm with affection. That's why we work, he replied. We're both insane, just in complementary ways. Her laugh rumbled like thunder, a sound he'd grown to love. 200 years ago, if someone said I'd fall for a human who upended my worldview by refusing to die, I'd have executed them for treason. Probably, he said. And you'd have been wrong. I've been wrong about a lot, she admitted. So have you. True, he said, grinning. I thought you'd kill me in that arena. I thought I would too, she said until you started talking. My superpower, he said, winking. It really is, she agreed. As the ship turned toward home, carrying impossible reunions and improbable love, Ardun reflected on the journey from that blood-soaked arena. A war ended, a sister returned, two species learning to coexist. The treaty might have sealed peace, but this Solera and him Lysera's return, the slow, messy work of understanding, was what would make it last. What are you thinking, Solera asked. That we still haven't figured out the kissing thing, he said, smirking. She laughed again, that thunderous sound he adored. We'll work on it. We've got time, all the time in the galaxy. For the first time in their lives, that felt like enough. 5 years after the treaty, Ardun stood before the Unified Council, preparing for a speech that might outshine all others. Not about war or peace, but something far more personal, infinitely more complex. He adjusted his ceremonial robes designed to bridge Terran and Zyran aesthetics, which meant they looked equally absurd to both species. Distinguished members of the Terran Coalition and Zyran Empire, he began resisting the urge to fidget. I stand here to address the rumors, the whispers, in what tabloids call the galaxy's most scandalous romance. A ripple of murmurs swept through the crowd. In the front row, Admiral Harwin gave him an encouraging nod while General Tavar maintained his stoic facade, though Ardun caught the subtle scale shifts signaling amusement. Yes, Ardun continued, his voice steady. Queen Solera and I are together. Yes, we know the biological impossibilities. Yes, we're aware some religious groups on both sides claim our bond heralds the end times. To them, I'd note they said the same about the peace treaty, and we're all still here. Laughter rippled mostly from the Terrans, though a few Zyran scales flickered with suppressed mirth. But I'm not here to defend our relationship, Ardun said. I'm here to talk about what it means and what it teaches us about the future of Terran-Zyran cooperation. He clicked to a slide showing a graph of conflict incidents over 5 years, the line plunging steadily downward. When we signed the treaty, many called peace impossible, our species too different, our histories too bloody, our natures too opposed. Yet here we are. Trade has surged by 400%. We've built joint colonies on 12 worlds. We've shared tech that's lifted both our peoples. Another slide flickered up images of Terrans and Zyran working side by side. None of this was easy, Ardun said. Every step demanded negotiation, compromise, a willingness to see beyond differences to what we share. It meant stopping seeing each other as monsters and starting to see each other as people. He paused, meeting Solera's eyes in the royal box, her slight nod fueling his resolve. That's why I'm here, not to justify a relationship, but to propose something even more radical. The Interstellar Academy for Unity, the first truly integrated Terran-Zyran institution where our youth can learn together, forge a shared future. Prepare to lead our species into a unified future. The chamber erupted, a cacophony of protests, arguments, and a few scattered shouts of support, blending into the kind of chaos that reminded Ardun why he preferred one-on-one talks. Solera rose and silence crashed down like a guillotine. Even after 5 years, her presence commanded the room, her 6 violet eyes sweeping every corner with unshakable authority. The human speaks with my full support, she declared, her voice resonating like a velvet-wrapped storm. We've proven peace is possible. Now we must show cooperation can endure. The Interstellar Academy for Unity is the next step. Your Majesty, Counselor Vraxis. A conservative Zyran delegate rose with measured respect, his scales glinting cautiously. This goes beyond cooperation. You're proposing integration, our young learning alongside humans. It's unprecedented. Everything these past 5 years has been unprecedented. Solera countered, her tone, steady but fierce, and we're stronger for it. The biological differences can be managed, Ardun interjected, his voice cutting through the tension. We've designed facilities to accommodate both species, atmospheric controls, gravity adjustments, dietary needs. It's all planned. How long have you been scheming this? Harwin asked, her tone, suggesting she already knew the answer. 2 years. Ardun admitted, a wry smile tugging at his lips. Since Lysera's school in the Outer Territories showed Zyran and human refugee children could learn together successfully. That sparked another stir. Lysera's return had been a lightning rod, But her quiet success in the outer territories was a story neither government knew how to handle. If I may, Lysera said, rising from the gallery. She'd shunned official roles, working from the margins, yet her voice carried the weight of her legacy. For 3 years, I've taught integrated classes. Children raised together human, and Zyran don't see enemies. They see classmates, friends, family. The prejudices we carry, they're learned, not born. A lovely sentiment, Senator Martell, a Terran delegate, said, his tone polite but skeptical. But this isn't about children playing together. It's about sharing knowledge, potentially sensitive knowledge. It's about survival, Arden said firmly, his voice ringing with conviction. Not against each other, but together. The galaxy's vast, and we've met 17 spacefaring species in the last 5 years. Some friendly, some not. We're stronger united than divided. The debate raged for 3 more hours, a grueling marathon of questions, challenges, and barely veiled barbs. Ardan navigated it with the patience honed from years of wrangling both species' bureaucracies. When the session teetered on the edge of pointless bickering, he played his final card. There's one more thing, he said, pulling up a display that drew gasps from the doctors in the crowd. This is from the Unified Medical Research Center on Nexus Station. For 3 years, Terran and Zyran scientists have worked on something deemed impossible biological compatibility modifications. The chamber fell silent, a stunned hush. Not reproduction, Ardan clarified quickly. That's still beyond us, probably always will be. But we've developed procedures for safe physical contact, no allergic reactions, no toxin risks. We've created dietary supplements so we can share meals, even translation implants that convey not just words but emotional nuance. You're talking about altering our core biology, Vraxis said, his scales flashing an alarmed orange. I'm talking about adaptation. Ardan corrected, his voice steady. The same thing our species have done for millennia, just deliberately now. Have these procedures been tested? Martell asked, his eyes narrowing. Ardan smiled, a spark of defiance in his gaze. You're looking at test subject number 1. I've been undergoing compatibility modifications for 4 years. Another uproar erupted, voices clashing in disbelief. Ardan waited for the noise to subside. It was voluntary, closely monitored, reversible early on. And it's let me do this. He extended his hand. Solera descended from her box, her movements regal, despite her lingering recovery, and took it. The sight of a human and Zyran queen holding hands without protective gear sent shockwaves through the assembly. This isn't about changing who we are, Solera said, her voice a clarion call. It's about choosing to change to build something together. Every modification Dr. Cole underwent, I matched with my own. We met in the middle, literally. You altered yourself for a human, Vraxis's tone was scandalized, his scales flaring. I altered myself for the future, Solera said, unflinching. For the possibility of true unity. If I, who conquered 112 worlds, can change, so can anyone. The vote, when it came, was tighter than Ardan had hoped, but better than he'd feared. The Interstellar Academy for Unity was approved by a narrow margin, with the condition that enrollment be voluntary and closely watched. Later, in their shared quarters on Nexus Station, a marvel of engineering balancing human and Zyran needs, Ardan collapsed onto the couch. That went well, he said, exhaustion lacing his voice. You have an interesting definition of well, Solera said, settling beside him, her massive form making the couch seem small. 3 delegates stormed out, 2 threatened to abandon the treaty, and someone threw a shoe at you. But the Academy's approved, he said, grinning. That's what counts. Optimist, she teased, then added, realist. I knew it'd be controversial. Change always is. She fell silent, then asked, do you ever regret it, the modifications? Ardan considered the question. Memories of the painful procedures flickering through his mind, weeks of sickness, foods he could no longer eat, sensations forever altered. Never, he said finally. Every change brought me closer to you. How could I regret that? Even though you can't return to human normal, she pressed. There's no such thing as normal anymore, he said. We're writing new rules. A chime announced a visitor. The door slid open, revealing Lysera and a younger Zyran, with striking unusual coloring and only 4 eyes. Ardan Solera. Lysera said, meet my daughter, Theria. Theria stepped forward, her movements deliberate, graceful. Your Majesty, Dr. Cole, it's an honor. Just Solera, the queen said, studying her niece with quiet wonder. You have your mother's eyes. Only four, unfortunately. Theria said, a wry smile on her lips. The other two never developed a genetic quirk. Not unfortunately, Lysera corrected. Differently. It gives her a unique perspective, literally. Mother says you're building a school, Theria said to Ardon. A place where humans and Zyran learn together. We are, he said. Interested. I want to teach there, she said. Not yet, but I will be. I've been helping Mother with refugee children. I'm good with younglings, especially those who don't fit neatly. Like yourself, Solera asked gently. Like myself, Theria said, meeting her aunt's gaze steadily. Mother told me about your choices. I understand them. You did what you thought was necessary to protect our people. Now you're doing what's needed to help them grow. That's a different kind of strength. Ardon watched Solera process this, catching the subtle shifts in her expression. Surprise, hope, a flicker of fear. We could use teachers, Solera said finally, especially those who know what it's like to be different. Then I'll apply, Theria said. Thank you for the opportunity. After they left, Solera sat in silence, her six eyes distant. You okay? Ardon asked. I have a niece, she said softly. Lysera has a daughter. There's family beyond the Empire. How's that feel, he asked. Terrifying, wonderful, complicated, she said, then laughed. So, us? Yeah, he agreed, grinning. Pretty normal for us. The next morning brought news 3 more systems agreed to host Academy campuses. The afternoon carried protests from hardline factions on both sides. By evening, a breakthrough in compatibility research hinted at shared atmospheric spaces without suits. Never a dull moment, Ardane muttered, sifting through reports. You'd be bored otherwise, Solera said, her tone teasing. True, he admitted, though a little quiet wouldn't hurt. I have some dull news, she said. Agricultural Treaty subsection 15 needs review. Oh, thrilling, he said, rolling his eyes. They worked in companionable silence, Ardon, at his human-scaled workstation. Solera at her larger one, passing documents and debating points. Do you think it'll work, she asked. The academy, the integration, all of it. Honestly, Ardon said, looking up, I don't know. We're unraveling millennia of mistrust. There'll be setbacks, failures, maybe disasters. But we've already done the impossible, ended a war, found a way to be together despite every barrier. The rest is just details. Just details, she said, smirking, says the man who argued for 3 hours over a treaty's font size. That was critical, he protested. Subsection 12 was illegible. She reached over, ruffling his hair, a gesture unthinkable 5 years ago. You're ridiculous. You love me anyway, he said. I do? She agreed, her voice soft, though I'm still not sure why. My charm, wit, and devastating good looks, he said, winking. Must be, she said, laughing. Another chime signaled Tavar's arrival, his expression grim. Your Majesty, Dr. Cole, we have a situation. When don't we? Ardon sighed. What now? A group of Terran and Zyran extremists have seized Ora Point. Tavar said. They're threatening to destroy it unless we abandon all integration initiatives. Ardon and Solera exchanged a glance. Terran and Zyran extremists working together, Ardon said. That's ironically progressive. This isn't a joke, Tavar said. There are 300 workers on that station. I know, Ardon said, pulling up tactical data, but you've got to appreciate the irony. They're cooperating to stop cooperation. What are our options? Solera asked. Military actions possible but risky. Tavar said. The station's reactor could be damaged. Negotiation, Ardon suggested. They've refused all contact except their demands, Tavar said. Ardon studied the data, then grinned. I've got an idea. It's stupid, probably dangerous, and Solera's definitely throwing something at me when she hears it. I'm already reaching for a data pad, she said, her eyes glinting with amusement. We go there in person, Ardon said. Together. Absolutely not, Tavar said. Hear me out, Ardon said. They're extremists who hate integration. What better way to challenge their biases than showing up as a united front force them to face us directly? They could kill you both, Tavar said. They could, Ardon admitted, but I don't think they will. Extremists want their grievances heard. We give them that, then show why they're wrong. That's insane, Solera said, but a spark of intrigue lit her eyes. Insane's never stopped us before, Ardon said. She stood, decision made. Prepare my ship, General, and have Admiral Harwin meet us there. If we're doing something stupid, we'll need backup. 3 hours later, they approached Ore Point 7. The extremists had taken control, but hadn't harmed the workers, a sign they weren't entirely beyond reason. Unidentified vessels stay back, or we'll destroy the station. A voice crackled over the comms. This is Queen Solera of the Zyran Empire and Dr. Ardan Cole of the Terran Coalition. Solera responded, her voice calm but commanding. We're here to talk. Silence. We're unarmed, Ardan added. Just two people wanting to hear your grievances. This is a trick, the voice snapped. No trick, Ardan said. You wanted attention. You've got it. The Queen herself and the Coalition's integration advocate. We're coming aboard. We'll kill you, the voice warned. Then you'll martyr the cause you're trying to stop, Ardan said. I don't think that's your goal. More silence than dock at Port 3. Any tricks and everyone dies. The extremists, 20 in all, a mix of species, stood in the control room. Their leaders, a scarred Terran veteran named Varn and a Zyran ex-soldier named Krex, stood side by side, united in purpose, but careful not to touch biology, still a barrier. So Ardan said, scanning the room, you've seized a station, threatened lives, and disrupted critical mining ops. I assume you've got demands beyond stop integration. This isn't a joke, Varn spat. I'm not joking, Ardan said, his tone earnest. I'm curious. What's your endgame? If we meet your demands, do our species just retreat to separate corners of the galaxy, pretending the other doesn't exist? Ardan asked, his voice calm but pointed. Is that your plan? It's better than this abomination, Krex spat, gesturing at Ardan and Solera, his scales flashing with disdain. Species mixing biology warped our pure heritage defunct. Pure heritage, Ardan echoed, a wry smile tugging at his lips. Interesting choice of words, Krex. Tell me how many of your tools are purely Zyran. That weapon's got chromac tech. Your armor uses Thurvian alloys. This station runs on Terran-designed life support. Mixing's fine when it suits you, but not when it challenges your worldview. You're twisting things, Krex growled. I'm calling out hypocrisy, Ardan corrected, his tone, sharp but conversational. Big difference. Varn stepped forward, his scarred face taut with anger. You've betrayed your own species, both of you. For what? Some perverse bond that spits in the face of nature. Nature, Solera said, her voice soft but resonant like a distant storm. She moved to the viewing port, her 6 violet eyes reflecting the stars beyond. Nature is adaptation. Nature is change. What Ardan and I have isn't against nature, it's evolution. Evolution doesn't work that way, Krex snapped. Solera turned, her presence filling the room. Every species must adapt or perish. We're choosing to grow to become more than we were. Pretty words, Krex sneered, but words don't change the fact you're different species. Incompatible. We were incompatible, Ardan said, his voice steady. Past tense. We chose to become compatible, and that choice is open to anyone who wants it, voluntary, not forced. You altered yourselves. Varn said, his tone heavy with disgust. We did, Ardan said, meeting his eyes. And I'd do it again. I fought the Zyran for 9 years, lost friends, nearly died. I had every reason to hate them. But hate is exhausting, it drains you dry. Peace, cooperation, even love. They're harder to build, but easier to keep. You're naive, Varn said. I'm practical, Ardan countered. The galaxy's shrinking. New species pop up every year. We can learn to coexist or fight forever. I know my choice. The debate stretched for hours, Ardan and Solera trading arguments, addressing fears, and chipping away at the extremists' certainty. Not everyone was swayed. Some minds were too scarred, too rigid, but they reached enough. Varn was the first to lower his weapon, his jaw tight. I still think you're wrong, he said, but maybe there's room for disagreement. That's all we're asking. Ardan said, his voice earnest. Room to try. The crisis ended without bloodshed. The extremists were arrested but treated fairly. Some would later embrace integration, others never would. Yet the point was made, even those who despised cooperation had cooperated to voice their hatred. You realize what we just did, right, Solera said, as they flew back to Karsara, the stars streaking past their ship. We talked our way out of another crisis, Ardan said, leaning back, exhaustion tugging at him. Proved them wrong just by showing up as us. We're pretty convincing as a pair, she said, a smile playing on her lips. We're impossible as a pair, he corrected, grinning. That's what makes us convincing. A year later, the first class of the Interstellar Academy for Unity graduated Terrans and Zyron, who'd studied side by side, forging bonds unthinkable a decade ago. Ardon stood with Solera and Lacera watching the ceremony, Theria among them, as one of the Academy's most beloved teachers. "Look at them," Lacera said softly, her two eyes bright with hope. "The future of our peoples." "They look terrified," Ardon observed, his tone teasing. "They look ready," Solera said, her voice firm. "Ready for a galaxy where the impossible becomes reality." A graduate, a young Terran woman named Saris, approached them. "Dr. Cole, Your Majesty," she said, her voice trembling with gratitude. "Thank you for showing us it could be done, the integration, the peace, everything." "We didn't prove anything," Arden said, smiling. "We just refused to believe it was impossible." Sarah smiled and rejoined her classmates, a vibrant mix of Terran and Zyron, all in matching ceremonial robes, facing a future both uncertain and brimming with hope. "Do you ever think about how things could have been?" Solera asked quietly, her gaze distant. "If I'd killed you in that arena, if you hadn't been so infuriatingly persistent about seeing me as more than a conqueror," Arden said, shaking his head. "This was always going to happen." "You believe in fate?" she asked, her eyes glinting with curiosity. "I believe in inevitability," he said. "Put two stubborn people in a room long enough and they'll either kill each other or fall in love. We just did both in a way." "We never figured out the kissing thing," Solera said, a playful note in her voice. "We found our own version," he said, winking. "True," she agreed, her smile warm. They stood together, watching the graduates celebrate a scene unthinkable 5 years ago now. "Just another day in their extraordinary life, Ardon," she said softly. "Yeah. Thank you," she said, "for walking into that trap, for refusing to fight, for being too smart for your own good and too stubborn to quit." "You're welcome," he said, grinning. "Thank you for not killing me." "It was a close call," she teased. "I know," he said, laughing. They stood in comfortable silence, two souls who shouldn't exist together but did, watching a future unfold that once seemed impossible. The war had ended, but love hadn't. In that space, a new galaxy was born. "Your Majesty," Tavar approached, his scales a steady blue-green. "The Council requests your presence for trade negotiations. And Admiral Harwin wants you to review new defense protocols," he added to Ardon. Ardon and Solera exchanged a glance, sighing in unison, before heading back to work. "Never a dull moment," Ardon said. "Would we want it any other way?" Solera asked, her eyes sparkling. "Absolutely not," he said, his grin mirroring hers. As they stepped into the case of interspecies politics, Ardon reflected on their journey from a staged negotiation to a real bond, from war to peace, from impossible to inevitable. The galaxy was vast, brimming with challenges and possibilities. But with Solera by his side, the Academy shaping the next generation, and peace taking root, Ardon felt something rare: hope, real, enduring, impossible hope. That more than any treaty, academy, or modification was the true victory. The war had ended, love hadn't, and that changed everything.